Hello, everybody. Welcome. So good to see you all. Today, we are here on another proofread with my friend and your cult leader, Christopher Maute. Chris, how are you?
Doing quite well. Nice and full
That's good
from
to
the
hear.
American holiday that just passed, and
Happy Thanksgiving.
recharged and ready to get back to work.
Do you have any concerns over the Thanksgiving being a sort of a celebration that the Native Americans might find problematic? Do you have any
Oh no,
any
well,
issues
America
with
has solved
Thanksgiving?
that by making the Friday afterwards like a Native American day. So we
Oh,
celebrate
okay.
them the day after. We give thanks for having robbed their land and
Yeah,
having
okay.
killed them.
Yeah. So at
So
least
yeah,
at
I mean
least
we
that is
fixed that,
acknowledged.
Mark. What are you
Yeah.
crazy? We just made another holiday that solves
Okay.
everything.
Well, you know what? I'm not opposed to multiple holidays. I certainly am not. I'm all for it, in fact. But it's good to see you. I haven't talked to you for ages. I feel like
Well,
I haven't spoken to you for too long, and
it might have been. Wait, it might have been your. You had like a 1,000 subscriber hang, and I
possibly.
maybe joined when at 30th Street Station. I remember using my phone to go in on one of your hangs, and that might have been the last time that we were in a hang together.
Yeah, probably. It's been crazy. The numbers have jumped. I mean, not exceedingly well, but considering I don't know what I'm doing and I don't really advertise anything, I just do my thing. It's been absolutely crazy, and I'm really overwhelmed by the support. And I know that you run a channel which I did have ready to drop. But why don't you, while I grab that, why don't you tell people about who you are and what you do and
Sure.
how we're gonna save the world?
All right. Well, I mean, two bald dudes figuring the world's problems.
I know
Um,
you sent that to me as a joke, but I found
I
it so
love that
funny.
you
I just
included it.
look. I just had to. I mean, and I know you meant it as a joke, but I found it so it made me giggle. So
It was
I
perfect. It is
just
perfect, I
the
should say.
just the idea of two bald white guys just solving all of the world's
Oh
problems
yeah,
in one conversation. Oh,
yeah, exactly.
absolutely, that's going to happen.
Well, to me, that is a foreshadowing of how I feel about debates online, because
Okay,
everyone treats
gotcha.
them as if this is okay, we're gonna figure it out. This person
Yes,
and
that is
this
true.
person are going head to head, and when they're done, we don't have to have this debate ever again. That's how
Right,
debates are
right.
treated online, but anyway. And it's usually two middle-aged white dudes arguing. Get
Yeah,
off my lawn.
arguing about abortion or something that has nothing to do with them. Yeah, no, I
They
get
shouldn't
you.
be opening their fucking mouths about part of my language. Am I
I
allowed to curse?
Yeah, yeah, that's fine.
Okay,
I
I'll try to
I
keep it
don't
short.
really mind. I
So
don't really mind.
I haven't done
I
this.
generally
Go ahead.
sorry, go ahead. No, you introduce yourself, and then we'll get
I was
into
just
it.
going to say, I haven't done one of these intros in such a long time, so I'm going to ask you to humor me as I kind of stumble through this. So, my name is Christopher Maute. I am a laboratory manager at a place called the Monell Chemical Senses Center. I manage a laboratory that studies the psychology of the sense of smell or olfaction. I also am a part time lecturer at Rutgers in Camden in the psychology department. I teach intro to psych and human emotions and childhood development and psychology of music. And that's all that I've taught so far. And I also am a part time musician. And I'm soon going to be transitioning at my job in the next couple of weeks to be doing the lab management part time. And then I'm going to be doing, I'm switching to an administrative position where I'm doing multimedia management, and I'll be responsible for the social media strategy for the Monell Chemical Senses Center. So if you should happen to see YouTube shorts or anything in your LinkedIn or Facebook show up about this bizarre Philadelphia Basic Science Research Center called Monell, it might be because of the strategy that I put forth.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, and so sensors are massive in your line of work.
They
And
are, yes,
that's
it is the focus. The chemical senses, obviously. That's taste and
mhm.
smell, gustation and olfaction. And then of course the trigeminal irritation that is involved with like the burning sensation when you smell something spicy or eat something spicy, or you burp after drinking something carbonated. And then, of course, the combination of smell and taste is what is responsible for flavor. And flavor is really more 80 to 90% smell than it is taste. And I can
Right.
demonstrate that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I definitely have heard that. I'm not sure. I kind of only partially understand why the smell and thing is, but just quickly, trigeminal, is that sort of how the senses are interpreted by the brain? Is that what you're talking about?
So
Explain what.
trigeminal, actually, that is a very specific name for the nerve that innervates your face, and it's kind of unique in the sense that it's bilateral, it's lateralized. So there is a branch that feeds your right, and some people get diseases where it gets triggered unnecessarily, and it's very painful, right? So imagine the
Right.
tickling sensation you get before sneezing, or the
Oh, I hate
tingling
that.
sensation after you drank a beer or a soda too fast. What's causing that irritating feeling is the stimulation of your trigeminal nerve. So, irritation, technically speaking, in the world of psychophysics, is defined as a tickling, tingling, burning, or cooling sensation, because there are many different irritant receptors, some of them responsible for the cooling, some of them responsible for the burning. That's why when you buy a product like Icy Hot, which I'm assuming there's a version of that in Australia, it has both the effect of cooling and burning, because it has two different ingredients activating two different kinds of receptors. And that falls into the gate theory of pain as a way of kind of blocking, closing the gate to the pain signal to the brain. So that was
Right.
you asked me what time it was, and I told you how to build a watch.
No, no,
Trigeminal.
I'm here for it.
Oh, so yeah, trigeminal means specifically the irritating feeling that you get from the face as determined by stimulation of the trigeminal nerve. I believe it's nerve. Man, I'm horrible at this. And I'm sure my boss is going to get pissed at me. I think it's like right under tympanic nerve. It might be cranial nerve 6 question mark. Somebody online tell me what the trigeminal nerve is, which cranial nerve it is.
Okay. I don't think I can spell it to look it up. I got to be honest with you. But something like smelling salts,
Yes.
right? You wave smelling
Ammonia.
salts and you have that visceral like reaction. That would be the trigeminal nerve
You bet it
getting
is.
activated.
Very acutely activated by an
Yes, yes.
intense stimulus. Yes.
I've never seen somebody smell smelling salts up close and not have that facial reaction, that overwhelming crunch of that smell, which is
Well,
just fascinating.
some would say that that's an evolutionary, like that is disgust, right? So if we talk about the evolution of emotions, disgust falls right into the chemical senses, because it is literally an attempt to get things out of you that you have ingested, whether they are smells or tastes or whatever. So that face that is made when you smell smelling salts is like the ultimate disgust combined with surprise face. It's
Yeah,
just
sure.
like, oh, get that out of me.
So and so what like I really hate when I can't follow through on a sneeze. I really hate that feeling. I absolutely loathe that feeling. It frustrates me. But um so gate theory of pain, can you just explain briefly what that is?
So I will do my best. Um, so the gate theory of pain is this idea that the way that very super basic primer, right? We have a central nervous system that exclusively comprises of our brain and our spinal cord. The analogy, the mnemonic device I use with my students is it's called the central nervous system. It is central to the body. The things that
Mhm.
extend peripherally from the central nervous system are your peripheral nervous system. And that is where you get afferent and efferent nerves to send and receive signals to our extremities. So,
Mm.
with that said, if we have our hand over something that is hot, right, and it causes pain, it sends a
Yeah.
signal from our hand through our spinal cord up to our brain, usually lands in our thalamus. The thalamus is the centermost part of the brain that acts like a relay station. So, depending on the information it gets, it directs it to the specific part of the brain that's supposed to handle that kind of information. So, that path usually
Mhm.
has a bunch of different synapses. It's usually not one long neuron that is
Right.
extending from your fingertip to your thalamus. It's usually a bunch of
Mhm.
different connexes, and the connections between neurons. Neurons are the neural cells. of the cells that make up your body. They are
Mhm.
the neural nerve cells specifically. Um,
Yep.
the synapses that connect them, you can think of some of them as acting as gates, right? And gates in the way that when they are closed, the message doesn't go, and when they are open, the message can come through. Now,
Right.
the gate theory of pain posits specifically that there are two kinds of acting fibers. There are fast acting and slow acting. So, the slow acting, let's see if I can put this correctly.
That
If I
sounds like
remember correctly,
muscles.
say that again.
That sounds like muscles, like fast and slow fiber muscles.
Well,
They're
it's not.
doing.
Well, that's twitch, right? When it applies to
Yes.
muscle, it has to do with twitch. This has to do
Okay.
with signal relay.
Okay.
So and I'm gonna forget the specifics of it because I don't have it in front of me, but I think it's like the type C nerves are slow and the type A are fast. But the theory is you can close the gate to the pain signal that is usually going along, let's say, the long pathway by stimulating the short pathways, again, through things like
Got you.
stimulation of capsaicin, which is a burning sensation when it binds with receptors, or some kind of mint or menthol, which feels cooling when it binds with receptors. That
Right.
interference of the signal is almost exactly, it's heading the signal off at the path and
Mhm.
closing the gate, preventing it from going further. That's the gate
Right.
theory of pain.
Well, that's fascinating. And how widespread is that theory? It's pretty well documented.
Oh, yeah, it is. I mean, unfortunately, pain is super weird because we still don't completely understand it. There was a
Yeah.
while where there was a substance called substance P that they were it was like the dark matter. Like there's this
Yeah.
something that's traveling in our system. We're going to call it substance P for pain. And I'm not exactly
Okay.
sure how far they've gotten with that, but the gate theory of pain is used or has actionable endpoints like the red berets and the marines, like any
Mm.
attempt to displace pain, any attempt to, when you're having pain, having a way to distract your attention or to
Yes.
have things in place that can mechanically take care of that pain. So for instance, the example that I use is this: Jim Carrey, when he was doing The Grinch. Okay, real quick.
Yes.
So The Grinch Stole Christmas was turned into a movie. Jim Carrey was the actor,
Yep.
and he had an 8-hour a day makeup call. And he
Mhm.
said it was painful because at the end of putting all this crazy hair on him, they had to insert yellow contact lenses. And it was just painful. It was 8 hours. Like that is a work
Yeah.
day. And that was just for him to get into costume for his work day. And he says he got into contact with somebody, I don't remember who was, a Navy SEAL or somebody like that, but he learned like, distraction tactics like stabbing yourself in the leg with like, not literally stabbing, but punching
Yeah.
yourself
Yeah.
in the leg, or doing things that just take your mind off of this pain so that it's that
Mhm.
pain, or other kinds of breathing techniques and stuff. But all of those techniques are ways of, even distraction is a way of kind of working the gate theory, because you can only perceive things that you pay attention to. So one avenue of changing perception and consciousness is to change the things that you attend to.
So even if pain is perception based, then what how can we say that all pain is objective or subjective then? Um,
That's a good question. Well, I
but
don't
this
know
is
anyone
this
who
is
would say that pain is objective.
right, right,
I don't
and
know anyone.
I wouldn't think so. But if you're sort of having neural stimuli, is that an objective thing or a subjective thing?
I'm going to make it even more complicated. The
Cool.
brain perceives physical pain the same way as it perceives emotional pain. Let me put that differently. It
Mhm.
doesn't matter to the brain whether somebody is physically hurting you or whether your feelings are hurt. And I don't mean that like whatever, like somebody cut you in line. I mean like
Yeah.
a heartbreak, right? Your brain perceives
Mhm.
the pain of a heartbreak in the same areas as the same way as putting your hand over a stove or getting stabbed or stepping on a nail. Like the pain response, so in other words, emotional pain is as much a social reality, and that is a word that I'm going to use based on the way I understand things, as the physical reality of physical pain, of contact, of a mechanical stimulation that causes pain.
Mm.
So, I mean,
So
yeah, so to get back to your question, is it
yeah,
subjective? Yeah, it has to be. Why? Well, because when we study psychology, we assume that the mind and the body are one thing. We are monists, right? We are not
right.
dualists. And
Yes.
because of that, we have found people that are born without receptors for pain.
Hmm.
So, if we assume that the mind is the body, that perception is the brain, the matter, that means that we think that we can figure things out such that the absence of the things we think are responsible for something will reliably lead to that person not having this thing. And the people with that thing will have this thing we're looking at. And to put it in less confusing terms, there are
Yeah.
people who don't feel pain. There are people who don't feel satiety. There are people whose interoception, which is our ability to appraise what's happening internally, their system is just jacked up. And we're slowly realizing the more we research this that your ability to interocept is a larger part of consciousness and perception than we had originally thought.
What do you mean by interocept? What does that mean?
Interoception is like a form of perception such
Hmm.
that our body is, our brain is at all times appraising what our body needs. So, based on based on this book right here, 7.5 Lessons About the Brain, Lisa Feldman Barrett, she uses an analogy in talking about the brain, pretty much saying the brain is not for thinking. Your brain is for surviving. And the best way to survive is to budget your body's energy balance, right? So that you know when you should expend energy running away, expend energy moving towards things, all of that kind of stuff. So interoception is your brain's attempt to make sense of what is happening internally so that it can maximize the efficiency of body budgeting, which in turn maximizes the probability of survival. So
Hmm.
interoception, just in technical terms, is your brain's ability to perceive what's happening internally. When you have a stomach ache, when your heart is fluctuating, even things that you're completely unconscious of, when you need more salt, when you need your liver to
Right.
filter more things, right? When you need more tears, lacrimary gland stimulation, salivary gland stimulation, shit you don't even think about.
Mhm.
But like, so this is part of what I tell my students. If you've ever heard that we only use 10% of our brain, be disabused of that by the time you
Yeah.
walk out of here. Your brain is responsible for doing things you don't even know about, right? Your brain is
Right.
not for thinking, but it does think. We do use it for thinking, but that's not what it's for. That we can think is this weird side
Mm.
project of the brain's ability to keep us alive.
Right. And so, and that brings us sort of neatly into needs. And I've been really interested in the literature on what people need and what humans need to be. And while I say happy, um, I'm not sure that happiness is something sustainable. Like happiness seems to be a fleeting emotional state that never sort of lasts. Like you're not constantly happy forever.
How do you define
Um,
happiness?
well, that ties into what humans need to be happy, doesn't it? Because if I can define what contributes to uh, sort of so I guess baseline sort of what humans need to be content or not unhappy. I guess we're getting at sort of what it means to be happy, I guess.
Yeah.
So I sort of, and I do every time I sort of look into it, it sort of comes up with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which I'm not sure how much you subscribe to that, but I've found sort of a lot of literature sort of saying, that's not really used anymore. It's a good starting point, but it's sort of this definitive hierarchy isn't that that accurate. So, what's your feelings on Maslow's hierarchy?
So, oh man, I'm looking for another book. So Maslow's hierarchy has been updated by an author by the name of Scott Barry Kaufman. And the name of the book is Transcend. And the idea is he did a deep dive into Maslow's notes and his history, and he kind of reorganized his my goodness, Maslow's hierarchy of needs into a different metaphor that is a boat, right? That has a foundation that floats along, reality, and then there's a sail that needs the boat, of course, but it's not it's not the hierarchy pyramid that Maslow used. In fact, in writing this book, he pointed out, the author Scott Barry Kaufman, that Maslow never put his hierarchy of needs into a pyramid. That's what somebody who
Right.
used his theory, who was in the business industry, that's how somebody other than Maslow organized his ideas into
Right.
into
Because
a meeting.
transcendence was at the top of this hierarchy kind of thing. It was the tip, correct?
Well, self-actualization was the top of Maslow's hierarchy, and then
Right.
there's I don't want to get too deep into the Maslow thing because he has different ways of being, right? There's growth versus desperation versus need, and then his transcend this there's like stage X. And also, really quick, because I was talking about the pyramid, if you want a more
Yeah.
proper way of thinking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, think of it as concentric Russian dolls, right?
Yes.
Such that the core one, is in the middle, and they build out from there, instead of like that pyramid. Because Maslow didn't think that everybody reached self-actualization, in the same way that Piaget, all the developmental theorists, Piaget never thought that everybody got to formal operations. Who was it? Kohlberg never really thought that people got to the highest level of morality. So it was just all that.
Do you
But
think people
right?
generally self-actualize?
I think few people self-actualize. I think, it's the smallest percent of the smallest percent of people. You have to take all the people in the world. You have
Do you
to take
think do
go
you
ahead.
think everybody has the potentiality to self-actualize?
Oh, that's a good question. I think that self-actualization requires a certain level of self-awareness, and I think that level of self-awareness is only achievable to people of a certain mental ability. And I think that a majority of people have the mental ability, the proficiency of mental ability to do that. But there is a small minority of the population who just don't have the abstraction possible to think to have the self-awareness responsible for the kind of self-actualization. So
I, I guess part of me says, and maybe this is an emotional response, but part of me would like to believe that everybody, given and maybe enough time, has the ability to do so. Maybe that's impractical. Maybe I'm naive, but I would like to think that people are. It is possible for anybody to get to that kind of self-aware point. Actually, just for everybody, can you explain what self-actualization is? Because you'll probably do a way better job of it than I will.
So the way that I actually, if you can vamp for a second, I can pull up my lecture on
Oh,
this.
sure, sure.
So just give me a hot
Yeah,
second.
yeah, yeah, Jordan. No, I realized after talking it that I kind of understand what it is, and of course, Maudi understands completely what it is, but I haven't actually given it to you guys. But so hang in there, not a problem. And Maslow's hierarchy. And while you're doing that, I did have a picture here. So keep in mind that this is sort of um, this is a more updated version, but it still is kind of a hierarchy. And there's sort of, it goes into what human needs are. So this would be sort of one of the dynamic hierarchies of sort of Maslow's, and they used to put it in this kind of pyramid,
Yes.
but this is sort of the very old, very sort of the classic version of it, but they sort of changed it to sort of this kind of thing, like physiological needs are always there, and that's
I like
like your
that.
food, your water. So safety needs are sort of, not feeling threatened and feeling secure in your environment, and not feeling under threat by, say, any government or something. Love and belonging, of course, that's community and having people to talk to and share your emotions with, and have emotions shared in turn. Your esteem is your identity of self, and who you are, and that you are valuable and sort of contributing, and your self-actualization, as we're about to get into. As far as I understand, that's achieving your full potentiality, achieving beyond what you are right now, and achieving something, your full potential as a human in your community. So and then, as Maudi said, that's sort of maybe very rare to see. So that's sort of what we're talking about at the moment.
Yes. So I have two. Oh man. What I have is, I'm going to try to screen share.
Yep, sure. Yeah, so physiological: air, water, food, heat, clothes, urination, excretion, shelter, of course, is huge, and sleep. So somebody, and it really concerned, because somebody on the street doesn't even have those physiological needs satisfied. But where the hierarchy sort of says, hey, you've got to address the lower ones before the higher ones. I don't know what you think, Maddie. I'm not sure that that's the case. You can still meet some of the lower ones, or some of the higher ones, without meeting the lower ones. So I'm not sure how much they're sort of dependent on one another.
So do me a favor. Here we go. So this
Yep.
is the newer version of, well, more appropriately, this is Scott Barry Kaufman's version of
Okay.
interpretation of Maslow, as seen through his entire journals and theories. So above self-actualization, um, Maslow said that there was a transcendent state where there was no self, you transcended binaries, you transcended us versus me, right? It was the attempt to see and feel like everything was a unified whole. And to Maslow, that was the transcendent, and it almost sounds monk-like and spiritual way of like navigating,
Mm,
the things that you need, right? Because that is what we're talking about. What we're talking about, just to reframe it for everybody, Mark was
yep.
talking about human needs, and he brought up happiness, and then he brought up Maslow as the hierarchy of needs. So in psychological terms, what Mark is talking about are what are called motivations. And usually this is studied along with emotions, because emotions are very goal oriented. What are those goals? Those goals are our motivations. Well,
Right.
among those motivations, what are our needs? Because there are direct reinforcers like food and sleep and connection. And then there are indirect reinforcers like money that can get us food. You know what I mean? That can get us a place or something to sleep on, and, afford us time to hang out with people. So this hierarchy of needs is one explanation of just intrinsic motivations within humans. The reason, so, and let's quickly just get some background here. Maslow was directly responding to the psychoanalytic Freudian way of seeing humans, because if you were to step back from Freud's way of looking at things, you'd have to admit that it's a pretty negative spin on humans. Humans
Right.
mostly want to indulge in their id and their pleasure principle, and we needed our ego and super ego to tamper down what we really
Mm,
want to do. Maslow was like, well, maybe we strive for goodness and growth. And that's where the hierarchy of needs stemmed from. It was an attempt to see humans. It's a humanistic approach that has a positive spin on why we're motivated to do things, right? And so, of course, this whole growth mindset by Carol Dweck and all that is inspired by these by these Maslow ideas. Moving
mhm.
on, Maslow was reinterpreted by Scott Barry Kaufman, and he came up with this sailboat such that the security that is the water, right? That is the foundation that this boat sails on. The boat itself is constructed on safety, connection, and self-esteem. He admits that at any point in your life and history, some of those foundational things might not be as steady as you'd like them to be. But when they are steady, you can build on top of it a sail to catch the winds of growth. This is his analogy. And then the sail itself requires us wanting a sense of exploration, having the love and connection that you desire, and above and beyond that, having a purpose to further explore growth, be creative, engage in the flow state, and then transcend. So Maslow's idea as filtered through and the best part about this book, Transcend, by the way, is oh good. Are you listening to me, Shanna? Are you listening to me? My wife is sending me texts of websites while I'm talking right now.
Well, because
that's okay.
You know, maybe consider some of the updated research. Is what I'm saying.
Did everyone hear that? My wife just said, "I just think you need to consider the updated research." She's sitting on the couch, fact checking me and sending me articles.
I'm all for it, to be honest with you. I love different sides and opinions. Hey, Shanna, if you want to drop into chat and I'll make you a mod and you can put the links in there. I'd love to see opposing views and stuff. Look, anytime someone proves Maute wrong, I'm all for it. I'm all for it. You're right all the time. It's bewildering. So sorry to interrupt you there, Maute, but yeah, I get the sailboat analogy. But really, I wanna get at so these sort of emotional desires and these needs that we have. So I want to get at fundamental needs and how much fundamental needs are actually subjective, or are they objective things? Do we have to strive towards these fundamental needs? Can we choose not to? Or is that behavior driven sort of, so when someone is self-destructive, for instance, they're actively destroying their own quality of life, I guess, because I try not to say happiness, because happiness seems to be, you can be having a miserable time, right? You're just going through a whole load of stuff in your life. You can still have moments of happiness. So I guess what it is that I'm looking for is these things that make our life good, that like the sailboat analogy, they propel us towards a more satisfying human experience. I guess I'm going to sort of use quality of life then instead of happiness. Sort of that contentedness with your life. I wonder how much of that is objective and how much is a subjective thing. Like, do we choose to do that, or is that something that is hardwired? And what does even hardwired mean when you're talking about sort of the evolution of humans?
Yep. You're asking all the good questions. Each one of those questions is a whole hang's worth of a conversation.
Yeah,
but
yeah. I totally understand.
I think that for tonight and for this conversation, we can absolutely, frame this as, all right, we do have fundamental needs. How do we know that? Without them, we die, right? Sure. Or to put it, even more extremely, unfortunately, there have been human experiments, not on purpose, just because of history and wars and the consequences of other human behaviors, where it is demonstrated that a lack of these certain foundational things also is a problem, right? So let me put this in different terms, because when I teach things like cognitive development and intelligence, students inevitably have questions about like, oh, well, how do I achieve those benchmarks faster? And Piaget, one of the founders of cognitive development, always called that the American question, the American problem. Like, why would you want to reach your milestones faster? Anyway, with that framing, we don't know how to reach milestones faster, but we have a surefire way of making sure humans don't achieve their milestones. And that is neglect, depravity, poverty, and lack of sustenance.
These indirect things that you were talking about, indirect what was it? I did have it down. Indirect
fundamental needs.
Fundamental needs, right?
Well, no. I'm talking about direct fundamental needs. Should you take away, like, let's just lay, like you need food, you will die without food. You will die without
Yes.
sleep, right? Let's
Yes.
include water with food, right? Food and water.
Yeah.
And sleep, and you can survive without affection, but it's a very different life than if you have it, right? That kind of bonding that happens when you are first born, that kind of language development that occurs when you are read stories, right? The kind of life that you live, depending on the amount of the quality of nurturing that you have, assuming you have above and beyond that food and sleep, then lots of things are possible. Now, the other question that you raised was how hardwired are decisions? Because if we can set that foundation that like food and sleep are absolutely necessary.
Yeah. That's not really a choice or a stance that you have.
Yeah, take
That's
them away and we stop
objectively-
living. Like, what else is?
Right.
Some would say without love and connection, we would also stop living, and we don't. We might die younger, but it doesn't like immediately kill you,
Right.
in the way that the sleep and the food would. So let's talk about hardwired. So this is nature nurture, right? This is a basic philosophical question that comes up again and again in psychology. And the problem is very few things are strictly nature, because because for those of you that aren't familiar with the question, nature usually has to do with biological, genetic coding, things that you're born with that are natural, and nurture has to do with the environment into which your natural form is born into. But depending on what you define as nurture, the placenta, the womb, is an environment. And depending on what your mother eats, experiences, how much they sleep, whether they smoke, what they ingest, whether there are, toxins.
Yep.
All of these things are changing the environment in which you're developing. So almost regardless of what your gamete donors contributed to your genetic code, epigenetics being what it is, if you're a female and your mother smoked, that environment could have triggered genes. Again, epigenetics doesn't create genes. It just activates existing genes that would not have been activated otherwise. But this is going to be 3 generations of problems, because you have mom who is the smoker giving birth to the daughter who is epigenetically now predisposed for obesity, even if she doesn't smoke, and she's now going to pass that gene, now that it has been turned on, to the granddaughter who is now at more of a risk for obesity. So how much of that is genes, and how much of that is nature, and how much of that is nurture? It becomes a very fuzzy question.
Well, I think from my understanding, when we're talking nature versus nurture, we're really talking behavioral sort of learning versus sort of even epigenetics. I would probably put that under nature. So your genetic switches turning on in response to a chemical reaction, I'd probably still put under nature. If that gene doesn't exist to be expressed, then it wouldn't happen. But I sort of see more nurture as learnt behavior. For instance, if you then accelerate that child up to the age of 5 or something, and they're constantly seeing their parents smoke, it may not be an expression of the gene, but rather the learnt behavior of watching their parents smoke that make them more likely to be a smoker, for instance. Rather than just say they're around smoke all the time, they get an addiction from a neuroadaptation. Their brain constantly expects that nicotine. That would be not a nurture thing. That would be a physical thing.
Or, I mean, again, to make things more complicated, and to be honest, the example that you're, not the smoking example that you gave, but the learning behavior versus unlearned, I see that as a specific example of the more broad version that I was talking about, because like when you talk about learned behavior, that is the environment impressing itself on you. So to me, that is still the environment explanation of nurture, right? Learned behaviors versus reflexive or intuitive behaviors. So when we look at behaviors, that is one application of nature and nurture. Because for me, because when you really just break it down, like whatever you put in the nature category almost always has to do with genes and biology and what we're born with reflexively
Right.
and intuitively. And what refers
Yep.
to nurture almost always has to do with what environment we're born into imprints on us in any way, shape, or form.
So, and it's funny because if you ask a geneticist, for instance, they'll say that everything is genes. And if you ask, obviously, I'm asking a psychologist, so everything is behavior, kind of thing. So it's kind of
And
it's
there's a
funny that
field
way.
called behavioral genetics too, right? And
Right,
also, let's
right,
keep in mind that as a psychologist, I would not say it's all behavior. In the
yes,
1940s and 50s, psychology was overcome by a trend called behaviorism. And yeah, if you asked a psychologist then, they would be like, yes, because according to Darwin, all animals are animals. We are animals. Why study humans? They're expensive. We can learn about humans studying mice. They're mammals with central nervous systems like ours, right? So learning is learning, all simple learning. They were wrong about simple learning. I mean, as it applies to humans, but as a psychologist, I think that what's most important is experience. What contributes to experience, behaviors, genes, and environment. So yeah, I'm certainly a lot more messy, but there
yeah,
is a field of psychology called behavioral genetics that attempts to explain all of behavior through genetics. And for those of you not familiar with it, behavioral genetics is kind of like in the same way that you would expect traits like height and hair color and eye color to
mhm,
be heritable through
yes,
genes. The behavior geneticists would say that extends beyond just observable, things like that into
physiology, yeah,
behaviors, right?
mhm,
So there are certain behaviors that we are prone to do. One of them has to do with eating, right? Some of us just have a genetic predisposition to not be sated after a certain amount of food, and just has a genetic predisposition that when when they ingest carbs, the body does something different to it than it does for people without this genetic predisposition. And the wanting to eat, like everything, the whole behavioral kit and caboodle of it can easily be demonstrated to be genetic in the same way that height is, right? So
right,
behavioral genetics are pretty much what you were talking about. Lots of behavior, if not all of it, can be shown to be genetic. When they say that, they're painting in broad strokes. The actual
sure,
areas that have been studied with genetics, and by the way, I'm book guy today. The book on behavioral genetics, which is the application of psychology to genetics, is right here. Robert Plomin's Blueprint: How DNA Makes Us Who We Are. He has wonderful chapter names. He's a clever writer, and he makes this very accessible. He has chapter names like parenting is important, or parenting is important, but it's not essential. And the way he talks about it is like, well, when it comes to personality and intelligence, it kind of doesn't matter what the environment is, because by the time those kids reach the age 25, they're going to be so correlated with their biological parents' IQ and personality variables that unless you like neglect them or abuse them or
right,
underfeed them, they're reaching that arc. So
mhm,
parenting doesn't matter so long as you give them what they need. But as far as
right,
styles go, no, they're getting to those marks genetically, whether you like it or not. So that's the
mhm,
argument for behavioral genetics. I don't
right,
take this whole cloth.
right. And so coming back to needs,
Yes.
so what's your thoughts on how those needs are you familiar with most of the stuff about secular humanism, what it means, what we're looking for? I don't know how versed you are in secular
I'm
humanism.
I'm familiar with secular humanism. So there is a think tank in America called Center for Inquiry, which promotes
Hmm.
secular humanism. And I was a research fellow there for 3 weeks, and I taught in their summer program about complementary and alternative medicines and how to view them with a skeptical eye. So I
Hmm.
um, I know about secular humanism. I wouldn't be able to wax philosophical about it with like an expert, but I know enough about it to realize that atheism, or the atheism that I abide to, is not a philosophical system onto which I can build any morality. It is secular humanism that I use as the philosophical building block for things like morality and such. Atheism is just letting you know what I don't do. Believe in gods.
Yes. So, did you grow up in a secular household? Did you grow up?
I was,
No.
in the words of George Carlin, I was raised Catholic until I reached the age of reason. So,
Okay. Yeah.
so and for me, it was a slow phasing out of religion. I went to art school, music school, and I took comparative religion classes, and it was just absurd. Like in my philosophy or psychology of religion courses as an undergrad, when I left music school and studied psychology, it was just like all of these are so the same. Like, after you read Edith Hamilton's mythologies book, it's like, really, like, humans are prone to have these thoughts, and they've organized this similar thought all across the globe, all across history. Okay, I get it. This is what humans do. It doesn't mean it's real.
Well, I have some thoughts on that. I wanted to sort of just quickly, Ian Davenport sending a super sticker
All
of a
right.
pair saying #1 fan. Thank you so much, Ian. I really appreciate it for $10 dues. It's worth about $2 US. So thank you so much. That's a lot of money to me. So thank you, Ian. I know I'm only joking, mate, but you know what I mean.
Thank you,
so,
Ian.
The question that comes up about morality, what we ought to do. So do you see a place, and really what I'm at the moment sort of massaging, working with, going over in my brain, maybe a little bit of obsessing over, is that can human fundamental needs, like we're talking about with Maslow's sort of standard, and I've been reading up on what's his name, Max Neef, fundamental human needs and sort of something on human givens as well. Sort of they all tie in with one another. Can they serve as things that we ought to do? Can they be oughts?
It depends. And so this is the psychologist speaking in me.
Yeah.
It depends on what your goals are. And your goals depend on what you value. So it starts there. What are you committed to? What do you value? What's important? What are your short and long-term goals? What is the strategy? So some would say a secular humanist position would answer it with something like to decrease unnecessary suffering. I can't make everyone happy, but I can work within a system that decreases unnecessary suffering. So if that is my goal, then I would want to provide nourishment and, increased quality of life for as many people as possible. That would be my short-term goal for my long-term goal, because I value
I get
other
that.
human lives.
So what you're talking about is meta-ethical relativism, which means that your meta-ethics is the goal. That's what you're after. So if I want and reducing suffering as a sort of to talk in the more philosophical sense, I think there's a problem with that utility. It's called a negative utility. So you could reduce all suffering by putting everybody on happy pills and locking them in rooms and make sure, sort of matrixing everybody into a simulation, for instance. So I like Sam Harris's idea of well-being. What makes a human well for a utility? Because you could lock everybody in a simulation a la Matrix and just keep everyone happy pills, but those people would not be well. And so that's why I particularly like that one. But I get what you're saying, but
I'm confused about who defines what well is in that. And I'm a huge Sam Harris fan. In fact, he's where I cribbed my definition from, because in the moral landscape, he uses that definition.
Yes. Yeah. And I think it's a really good start. I think he then went on to talk about sort of the promotion of a positive utility rather than the like sort of trying to take away a negative utility.
I'm happy to take that on board.
Well, in a certain way, I also think that when we're talking about suffering, sometimes the challenges in life are suffering. Adversity can be suffering. Anybody that's been through, I mean, you know, from the creative process that you know, adversity and suffering is part of that creative process. So I'm not sure that taking that away is necessarily what we're after. We need some adversity in order to
be anti-fragile, right? We need to be
well,
able
not
to
just
like
I don't think not just anti-fragile. Also, I think to develop and to self-actualize, we need to know the limits of ourselves, and we never know our limits if we never get faced with adversity. So I kind of think that adversity and challenge is integral, and even to a degree, suffering is integral to the human experience. But that being said, it can't be overwhelming suffering. It can't be just, you know, your life is misery. But I think that a well-rounded human will experience that in their lives. So
yes.
I do like the other one, but that aside, we sort of did say that there are some things that are objective. So if you're saying what you value, if it is objective that humans value food because they need it to survive,
sure,
is that a case of something objectively an objective goal? Is that something that all humans will want?
So yeah, so it becomes a matter of gradation at a point, because the answer could be everybody should have enough food to live on, right? But even in first world nations, you have people that are purposely intermittent fasting as a trend, you know, with research showing that, at least in animal models, long-term intermittent fasting, like for days at a time, makes them live longer. So, okay, if we want to combine human life, right, extension of human life with food, all right, now somebody has to decide how much food should everybody get, right? Just because we value food, that doesn't mean we need to like be the American fat asses that we are.
Yeah, and another thing that I thought of after thinking of that, and what I was about to go next, is that people will say do hunger strikes for noble causes, for instance, and we see that as a good and noble thing to do if the cause is good. So what I wanted to ask is, and this sort of ties into Maslow's hierarchy, things like safety and security, or freedom and autonomy, for instance, if you're taking fundamental needs, can that override some of the more basal things as being important? So we're talking about sort of sustenance, for instance, food and water. If you are really believe that your goal is to have freedom, is it ought you override that basal need for a more I guess ephemeral sort of vague concept of freedom?
So that's now we're getting into like socio-political psychology and identity and personality, or at least from my perspective, those are the topics of psychology that question kind of tap dances around. It has to do with identity, personality differences, traits, how people see themselves. And that is very much a combination of nature and nurture, right? There are things called honor cultures that are contrasted against dignity cultures, and honor cultures are much more about keeping their reputations good and securing the boundaries of their territory, whereas a dignity culture like couldn't care less and kind of laughs at the honor culture people for taking themselves too seriously. So, and of course, within each of those cultures, a variety, of different personalities can be raised. And so this idea that if we just start with everybody, regardless of their mental ability, regardless of their personality traits, all had enough to eat and enough to sleep, Some of us would want to flex our autonomy more than others. Some of us would
Mhm.
want the big, strong people to take care of shit that the big,
Yeah,
strong people
sure.
need to take care of. And just give me, like, I still know grown ass men that are looking for jobs where people tell them what to do because they don't want to think too much. I mean, there are just people who want to take control of projects and people who want to do what they're told. Right. And I don't, in at least that is an example in contemporary culture. So I can't imagine that's a brand new thing. Once we have everything that we need as far as food and sleep go, these differences in personalities and traits are going to come to the surface. And I
Yeah.
think that some people are going to flex their freedom and autonomy, just like in America, like they do today, differently than each other. For some people, freedom is really, really important. And for others, a community building is more important. And that's
Right.
less individualistic thinking. Some people want to
Mhm.
be more individualistic. Well, fine, but I don't trust that your individual nature is going to be for the better good of the larger community, right? And we can just pull any topic out. We can pull the COVID. We can talk about Fauci and public health
Yep.
communication and how that landed with different personalities of people who identified as wanting freedom and autonomy more than wanting to do what's right for the community. I mean, all of these to me are socio-political psychological factors, which I'm happy to talk about, but I just trying to put it in appropriate buckets as we talk about it.
No, no, I totally get where you're coming from. I mean, talking to Australians, I have realized we are a lot more collectivist than America is. America is a lot more individualist. And from that COVID thing, people are like, oh, you locked yourselves up and you were under lock and key. And it's like, yeah, that was good. That was a good thing to do. It saved lives. And most people, there was a little bit of protesters and stuff, but for the most part, everybody was happy to do so. I was happy to
Yeah,
do so.
yeah.
Everybody was. Yeah.
I mean, I have friends. I mean, fortunately, I have friends that run the gamut of political beliefs, but I have a friend that says that seeing somebody with a mask anymore is the equivalent. A mask is the equivalent of a MAGA hat. The opposite. Like
Really.
yeah, they're just like when you see somebody with a mask, you know that they are like as much in a cult on the left as somebody wearing a MAGA hat is in a cult on the right.
Wow. Yeah. See where we were. It's funny because
To be
um,
clear, that's not something I think. For those of you
no, no,
watching,
no, no, no. I got you, Maute. I got you. No, no, no. Well, it's funny because in Australia, even before all this happened years ago, we've got a very, very large multicultural population, and a lot of people, because of the region we're in, Oceania. So there's a lot of people from Asia, and they will wear masks just for having a cold, because of that more collectivist sort of mentality.
Mhm.
So seeing people with masks, or mostly it was Asian people with masks, people that whose culture was from Asia, Japan, China, places like that, where they're a lot more packed in, was not unusual even way before this started. So I think in a way we sort of were accustomed to that, and then when masks came out, it's like, well, yeah, it makes sense, right? That
Mhm.
something that they did just so they wouldn't pass flu around and things like that. So
Yeah.
yeah, just a different mentality.
But it
Um,
it makes you wonder, like, so in a country like the United States that is so large that there are these pockets of
right.
like-minded people that don't agree with each other, and there seems
Mhm.
to be a trend where the coastal metropolitan areas agree with each other in a way that everybody in the middle and bottom don't. So how do you govern? How do you set a structure? What is the strategy for bringing those people together when some of them think that you leading the government should be doing your job and reducing the government, and other people think you should be expanding it to help the less advantaged,
Mhm.
right? So this is
And that's been the history of America, the two-party system that's sort of fought against one another forever. Um,
But let's talk
I
about needs, because I think that both people who are autonomous freedom seekers and those that
Mhm.
are community builders, and I'm not saying that those are mutually exclusive categories, but for the
Right,
purpose
right.
of conversation,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
think that they would both agree that we should meet everybody's needs. I just think that they would think that the strategies to achieve it would be very different. And this very much falls into the
Yes.
Jonathan Haidt political breakdown of categories, right? The principles of morality, such that Republicans and Democrats don't necessarily disagree. It's not that Democrats
On the
have
outcome,
one set
yeah.
of morals and the other Republicans have one and the Democrats have another. They just have a different version of each of them. Freedom means something
Right.
different to a Republican than it does to a Democrat. Contributing to the community means something different for a Republican than it does to a Democrat. Being self-responsible is,
Mhm.
these kinds of things. So, yeah. And are those born out of like personality, psychological variables? Yeah. But some of it is like when you were, think about the South of the United States right now, the state of Florida. They're allowing Prager University content in as public school education. So
Yes.
in the next few decades, generations, what is their perspective going to be like, considering that it's shaped by an omission of information about facts and then the commission of lies or exaggerations about what happened? Right, because Prager
Well,
University is a super right-wing
yeah.
misinformation fucking factory.
Well, it's odd how the corporate world has changed over the last couple of decades as well, where sort of individualists used to be very, very highly valued, especially sort of during the 80s and things. It was all about the individualist. It was all about the one person sort of crushing others beneath their feet. Especially technology companies are working more and more towards teamwork. That companies aren't interested in whether you can do a great job by yourself. They're interested whether you can work with a team. Because if you can't work with a team, you're useless nowadays.
Now,
Things are
so
not a yeah.
fantastic. Let's use this as an example, Mark, because I have wonderful current contemporary examples that kind of feed into your needs component. But let's use
Okay.
what you just talked about as
Yeah.
the lens. So here's something that I'm noticing. This community-based way of working, like, can you work in a team and are you willing to do what it takes?
Yes.
Those Protestant work values that America was founded on are being
Are they
questioned.
Protestant?
Yeah, I think that the Protestants, your value was in your ability to work and the work that you accomplished and your productivity. At least that's how I understood it. All right, and
Right.
I didn't invent the phrase Protestant work ethic. I believe that's a thing.
Okay.
I could be wrong. Let's look it up real quick together.
Oh, I thought you meant sort of the teamwork style of thing is what the Protestant. I don't think that's
Well, the
Protestant.
idea that productivity is valued, and I
Yes.
guess I'm skipping a step. What's the best way to be productive is to work together to get shit done.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah. Okay, gotcha.
I'm sorry, I kind of skipped over
No,
that.
no. That's fine. No, I see where you're coming from. No. That's fine.
All right, so where was I going? So the work ethic that we were kind of raised in, that I might be the last vestige of, right? It is being questioned by newer generations. So for instance, I mean, there are whole TikTok channels dedicated to this, where it's the language that I would use to inspire motivation in my technicians could easily be interpreted as me asking them to work harder for less money or to work extra for no money, right? And I'm not saying this
Right.
is actually the case, because we actually pay overtime and I'm cool with my technicians. But if I was a dick, I could be like, all
Right.
right, so I can't really afford overtime, but this project really needs to happen, and I really need everyone to pull together for the greater good. New generations sound like to new generation, that sounds like boomer talk for I need you to work for free.
Yes.
So this idea of individualism versus community building is seen even in dynamics like that. And it raises the question, what are the things that we need? Another very popular like TV episode is that one actress from Aubrey something from Parks and Recreation. She's in a
Aubrey
dramatic
Plaza.
role. What's that?
Aubrey Plaza.
Yes. she's in a dramatic role where like she's looking for a job and it's an internship, and the woman's talking to her like somebody who's used to hiring interns, and she flips the script and is like, this, I don't get paid for this. I have $60,000 in student loans. And she was, it wasn't when I was your age, it was an honor. And I was like, when you were my age, did you have $60,000 in debt because of, and then the woman tries to tell her to do something. She's like, I don't work for you. Don't tell me what to do until you hire me. Like just that independent, autonomous attitude of, I need to meet my needs. I don't have time to do an internship for free. The landscape is different. So I think that feeds into individualism versus community building, what it is that we consider we need, how that changes over time. Right.
So we're really looking at if that community isn't meeting your needs. And I suppose this ties into sort of social contract theory. If the fundamental needs aren't being met by the community or the government or the system, then what will come is a rejection of obeying or adhering to the societal norms of that system.
Well, if there's no, I mean, vigilantism, I mean, that would be the logical, right? That is the prototypical taking it upon yourself, right? When you don't trust the structures that provide law and order. And of course, some people are going to take the law into their hands in very different ways than others. Some people are going to be more compelled. Some people with the pre-existing system of law and order would rather take law into their own hands. Let's not get twisted.
Right. Yeah.
But as far as who would actually do something about it, I think that, you know, and I also think that there are cohorts of, you know, first world nation populations in the first world nation that feel like that. They feel that the structures of law and justice and order are compromised in a way that, you know, January 6th, people wanted to overturn the government because they thought they knew better and their rights were impinged upon.
Right.
Infringed. Impinged means to.
Either works, I think. Either really works. But you know, I mean, that's getting to a whole load of misinformation and propaganda and sort of some of the things.
But that's the nurture part of nature nurture. That's very important, especially if you don't teach critical thinking. Propaganda, especially in today's day and age with social media, people are surrounded by screens.
That's what I was going to say on your Florida question. If you're not teaching people to think critically and just, you know, sort of going for what is evidently untrue, that's where I see a failing. They're going to not be able to. I think it's a huge detriment because
we're going to be at pre-World War I education levels. Let's put ourselves in the time machine. It's before World War I. They are recruiting Americans to go into war. People from Indiana are meeting Jewish men from the East Coast for the first time and asking if they can take their hat off so that they can see their horns. This is a thing that happened. It is in the journals and diaries of these soldiers where that books and audiobooks that I listen to have been made about, right?
That's insane.
That is what we're headed towards, where everyone's educated in a silo that doesn't know the other silo exists. Now we're going to have these bizarre stereotypes reinforced, and with ignorance, it's just going to breed chaos. You know, or, I mean, not actual chaos, not like anarchy chaos, but like the more stringent you want to set a boundary against other people that are in your own country, the more you're likely to get pissed off over stupid shit. Because that's already, I mean, from a, you know, I consider myself raised in a dignity culture. That's already some petty fucking shit to be worried about to begin with. So,
so you know, I'm not a patriot. I'm not a person that I sort of consider myself a citizen of the world first and foremost. I don't think humans are ready to have sort of a world government or a world nation or something like that. But
do you think there should be one?
I think it's inevitable that there's one.
Do you think we need one?
I think that no, I do see what you're doing. Do I think we need one?
This is a high level need.
Sometimes yes,
This
and
is a high
sometimes
level
no.
need,
Right.
right?
And
Because
then
this high
sometimes
level
yes, and
structure
sometimes no.
will indirectly allow us to have our direct needs of food and sleep.
Right. Um, Sometimes I think we should, and sometimes I think we shouldn't. I think that at the moment, my firm belief is that humans are not ready for that in the slightest. I think it would be devastating to try and even implement something like that. Nothing would be
I want
agreed
to
on. It would be
unpack what you
chaos
mean
and
by
anarchy.
humans aren't ready. Do you mean that individual humans, like we are just not ready, or the way that the socio-political landscape currently exists? Because that's
Yes.
talking on a population level.
Well, I think that the current structures that we have built, especially the corporate structures and the entire framing of capitalism, what it's meant to achieve, is just incompatible with the idea of a centralized government to take care of everybody. I think
Why?
that's
How do you
incompatible.
just what's your argument for that?
Well, I think that sort of the motivations of capitalism is essentially, the making of profit for certain shareholders. I don't think that
That's
can
not a
be
human
coherent.
trait. I thought you were talking about humans.
Well, we built those institutions. They didn't come about
Yeah, but
by
that's a
themselves.
structure.
Well, so
Well, but that's not a human thing. Like, are humans capable of it? Are there
are
humans that exist
humans
in
capable of it?
non-capitalist worlds? Yes. So are those people who don't or third world nation, non-capitalist, are they capable? Or I mean, of course, I'm
I
being
think
devil's
I think
advocate,
they're
Mark. You know that,
capable.
right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I know. I get you. I think that humans are capable of it, but not everybody, and not to a large degree. I don't think humans are capable of agreeing on what kind of system that would be.
You sound
So,
like somebody who's talking about self-actualization.
what do you mean?
Well, in my mind, because I aspire towards self-actualization, and because
Mm,
earlier I said that a lot of people just aren't going to be ready for the self-actualization. It kind of sounds like the language you're using with some people just might not be ready for the global government, right? Which I see as a, a very hierarchy of needs. I think that a world government would be a good thing. I think that, living on the same planet and understanding
yes.
other cultures and standardizing certain things, I certainly think that that would be a good thing. So for me, that's at the top of a hierarchy, just like self-actualization is. But some people aren't going to be ready for self-actualization. Some people aren't going to
Right.
be ready for this global government. Does that kind of make sense? At least the way that my
Well,
head was thinking about it.
the way I argue it, and what I think is that we're just uncovering sort of what kind of situation that we're in, and nobody panic, but we're in like a tiny speck on the most hostile environment you could ever imagine around us. It's absolutely lethal, and we know that there's certain events like possible asteroids and possible climactic events and possible all these things that can wipe us out. And I kind of liken it to ants on a leaf in a river, and they're fighting over the leaf. It seems nonsensical to me. I just what I would love to do first off is basically have a contingency that if ever we're in global peril, that all wars just cease and we all work together. That's essentially what I'd love to see. Just that contingency on every government across the world, that if we're ever in imminent extinction level peril, that they just be forced to work together. Wouldn't that be lovely? Wouldn't that be absolutely wonderful
That would be
if you
great. It
had
wouldn't
that?
necessarily be world peace. It wouldn't have to be world peace. It would
Correct.
just have to be drop the bullshit for a little bit.
Just a little bit while we figure out how to deflect an asteroid, or how we
Yeah.
we relocate people from where, and
What
something's going
resources
to
do
happen.
we have globally? How can
Right.
we put them together to achieve this
Right.
goal? Yeah, I think that that would be fantastic as well. Now,
Mm.
let's talk about secular humanism, how
Mhm.
it fits into our needs. And then
Yes.
let's kind of transition a little bit towards debate about these topics. Like you and I are
Yeah.
mostly in agreement. I'm trying to be devil's advocate about a couple certain things, but
Sure,
people
sure.
seriously debate these topics. And the things that we're
Absolutely.
talking about are a lack of moral objectivism, unless you have an argument for moral objectivism, because it sounds like
I don't.
Okay,
No.
I just made an assumption there. In a
I
way
look.
that
Here's the thing, Maute. Just quickly, I would
Go.
like there to be objective morals. That would be nice if we could say, "Hey, we can identify," and this is why I kind of search for them. And I really want to get into more of Graham Oppy and things like that. He's a moral realist, and but I'd like there to be, hey, this is what we ought to do to be well, or to, you know, this is what we ought to strive for objectively. But I can't find anything of the sort. So, as much as I'd like it to be the case, I have to accept reality.
I think looking for objective morality is a mistake. I think that is a quantity. That is a strategy that is based on like metrics and quantity in a way that don't necessarily take quality into effect, right? To me, it's almost like wanting an objective morality is a very medical approach to morality, right? If I can find the cancer, I can attack it.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think that it's more like psychology, where morality is kind of like a perceptual thing that is also based on some objective factors, but it depends on your goal as to how those objective factors are interpreted, because let's keep in mind, meaning is usage within context. If you change either of those, you will change its meaning. So the same usage in a different context means something different.
Right. And that's where you get into relativism, moral relativism. And in my case, I think I do subscribe to meta-ethical relativism is saying, well, if you care about the well-being, your well-being, or you know, and the well-being of society, I guess, of humans in general. But even I can work with somebody that just wants their own well-being, because a healthy society is good for you. I can show that is the case. I think we can make some statements on what you ought to do.
Yes.
And a lot of religious people want to say, well, that's not objective. But it seems to me that being well, having a quality of life seems to be, and I won't say it's universal, but it does seem to be ubiquitous. Like
there's a convergence. There seems to be a consensus and convergence on at least 3 variables that are necessary, right? It is the food, it is the sleep, and usually people throw in intimacy or sex or reproduction as a genetic thing, right? Or reproduction, hopefully that includes intimacy and the connection and all that stuff.
Sure.
And then, of course, that's where religion starts coming in to start making rules and shit like that. Or moral law, you know, that predate religions, you know, moral codes, unwritten laws of our hunter-gatherer ancestors, you know, like they still existed. There were still norms that were created, and these social norms that are unwritten rules eventually become codified, but they only become codified after, in my opinion, a society has reached a certain level of luxury. Because the idea, the philosophical abstract idea that things need to be written down and codified exists when you are secure in your foundations, your ability to sleep, your ability to survive, your ability to reproduce.
So do you think animals have morals?
Good question. I think that there are norms within animal worlds. And so using that loose definition, yeah, like so long as you're framing it within the rules that you observe of a pack of dogs, a litter of kittens, whatever, yeah, you're going to see common behaviors that are accepted, and then behaviors that the mother is going to change. If a kitten tries to crawl on a cat's stomach, it'll get swatted so that it learns, you know, not to attack his stomach, the mom's stomach. This, you know, little things like that. These instinctive behaviors are shaping behavior towards something. Okay, well, that kind of raises the question, well, away from what? Towards something. Well,
and Daryl says, yes, humans are animals. Thanks, Daryl. Yes, thank you. I think we both meant other animals. But yes. Yeah. No, thanks, Daryl. You're not wrong, mate. You're not wrong. You're technically correct, which is the best kind of correct. Sorry, yeah, and so really, I think with secular humanism and meta-ethical relativism, we can sort of then say, well, if you want to have quality of life,
Yes.
there are other oughts that we can deduct, like, for instance, intimacy and things like that. That
Yes.
if you want to have a good life, then you have to do this. You have to have some kind of community connection with people. You
Yes.
have to what are some of the other ones? You have to have safety and security, like people
Yes.
can't be threatening you. So you ought not to threaten people,
Mhm.
because that will
Decrease your quality of life, or of the people who
of
are being threatened, they will have an unnecessary amount
right.
of cortisol, which isn't meant to last in your system a long period of time and can have unfortunate consequences for the rest of your life. So mortality, which can be used as a metric for high quality of life for extended periods of time, right? When
Mhm.
populations average age increases over time, you can assume that certain amount of luxury has foundational elements have been met over those periods of time.
Hmm.
But I was talking about the opposite of that, right? I was talking about
Opposite of what?
I was talking about the opposite of proliferating for a long period of time. That's right. So cortisol. So if you have a lot of cortisol in your system, there is a low likelihood that you're going to have that high quality of life extended period of time, because with that amount of cortisol, there are going to be a downstream of consequences that are going to decrease your quality of life and potentially um, have you die at a younger age. So these are the things that we have to think about. So how are we going to know? Okay, so we want to make sure that nobody feels threatened, everybody's fed, everybody can eat, everybody works, everybody's resourceful, assuming that that is a human need? Question mark.
But cortisol is also done by stress, right?
Yeah, well, it is the stress hormone. So for people that feel
Yes.
threatened for long periods of time, they're stressed for long periods of time. And so cortisol, which I'm going to use that anti-fragile analogy that I used earlier,
Mhm.
in small doses when, something goes wrong, cortisol is super duper important. But it is
Right.
not meant to stay in your system at base, plasma levels for long periods of time, because that has
So
a detrimental effect.
could I put something to you? And this is
Yeah,
just something that has crossed my mind before, and decided to butt in on the conversation,
do it.
just
Changing channels.
um, could religion address the perception of those needs being met without, in fact, meeting the needs? How is important is it that the needs are actually met, and not just the perception of, like, because if you're talking safety and security, if you believe there's a God watching out for you, you may live as though that need has been met, even though it hasn't actually been met.
Well, let's talk
The
about the
same
history
goes.
of religions, right?
Okay.
When religions first started, as I understand it, and I could have it wrong, somebody please correct me if I do. But when we were starting in smaller populations, hunter gatherers, there was religion, but it was mostly animism. It was
Yes.
applying anthropomorphic traits to natural events, right? The sky, whatever. There was a plant
Yeah.
god,
Yeah.
there was a rain god, there were all these
Make
different
things
things,
grow. Yeah. Yeah.
but it wasn't necessarily things that you interacted with unless it was ceremonial. And then
Mhm.
as populations got larger, there needed to be this monotheistic model that kept an eye on everybody, because when the tribes are small, everybody in it and everyone's
Yeah.
accountable to each other. But once you breach a certain number, you
Mm.
don't know everybody in your community. So the religion kind of has to transform into a monotheistic, I am always watching and I am the provider kind of religion. So you asked, can religions give the impression of meeting our fundamental needs without actually doing it? I would say that organized religion, the organized part, is the community building that is a mechanism for meeting needs,
Yes.
right? Counseling started in the church, right?
Yeah.
Um, Donations or charities started in the church, right? The idea that community is necessary to meet these needs, I think, is held together. It's not, religion isn't needed for it, but religion is the first template that was used. Can it happen secularly? Happens all the time. Go to a sports game, go to a rock concert, right? That same kind of like everybody, you know, coming together for a common something is fantastic. So
yeah, and so I think that part of me thinks that it appeals to people on a fundamental, because we often talk about the God-shaped hole, and it has crossed my mind that that God-shaped hole may be that we have to feel safe and secure. We have to feel like there is some sort of something out there that will take care of us in order to feel secure.
I mean, I was
Yeah,
gonna
go on. No,
I keep
comment.
you keep bringing up things that like are wonderful ways to talk about things we talked about as if it was foreshadowing, and it's not. But hold
What
on
do
a
you
second.
mean?
So within that structure, right? So we were talking earlier that within any population, there's going to be people who want to be taken care of and people who want to do the taking care of, right? Who want to be the caretakers. So I think that applies even within religion, right? There are some people within a religious community that want to step up as a pastor or an usher or whatever within that community. And then there are others that want to adore the people who do that and be told what to do. Now, do I think that there's a unit? Because the reason why I bring this up is when you asked the question that you did, you almost made it sound like you were asking whether there is a universal human predisposition to want things taken care of for us. I think that's a personality trait, even if that's not where you're going
Yes.
for. But, and if it wasn't, please
Yeah.
clarify.
No. I get you. Really, I guess where I was going with that is it better for our well-being to be individualistic, or is it better for our well-being to be collectivist?
Oh, brother, run for president and and join the social experiment so that we can figure that shit out.
Yeah, I think that it is, you know, just from my point of view, I think that it is better for our well-being to be collectivist, because we are insanely weak, solitary animals. We kind of rely on that social fabric, that social landscape to function in the way that we do. So I lean towards a more collectivist. And don't get me wrong, I'm not a Marxist or anything like that. I
Yeah.
don't believe in that. But I think that sort of a more collectivist
Well, I have a
sort of
question for
overall
you.
ideology. Yeah, go for it.
Even though you have a preference for collectivism and or let's just say you lean collectivist, right? So that we don't have
Yes.
to, you know, have any
Yeah.
disparaging side chat comments.
Sure.
And that's something that we agree on. Do you think it's valuable to have people who aren't collectivist to challenge the system? Because if everybody's collectivist, don't you think that that would leave opportunities for humans to take advantage of, to harness that towards negativity? Whereas if there are people arguing against it, and this is an argument I have for atheists, you should be able to answer the questions of people who proselytize, right? You should be able to
Sure.
go, if you are an atheist activist, you should be
Sure.
able to go toe to toe with Cy 10 Bruggencate. You should be able to be challenged by whatever the challenge is, and you should be able to answer for that if you're an activist for atheism. So I kind of feel the same way as it applies to that.
So I think that even while I'm a collectivist, I do realize that identity is incredibly important as one of our needs. Being able to say, "Hey, I am an individual with my own thoughts," is incredibly
Being
essential
validated as an individual is different than
correct. Yes.
individualistic societies, right? So
Right.
if that is the facet you really want to slide in there, I can buy that. I can buy the idea that, okay, even in a collectivist society, there are going to be individuals who want to be known, you know, not as citizen 0053. You know,
Correct.
they
Yes.
want,
And I
they
don't
want to be
think
known.
anybody should be. I think that's sort of There's nothing more disheartening than working in a corporation, and even though you're part of a team, is not having your individual achievements recognized is still really disheartening. So I think there is room for sort of a mixed collectivist individualistic society. I think there is room for, and that's the balance we've got to strive towards. How much do I weigh, and this is a question that's often occurred to me when you're talking about human well-being, how much do I weigh what makes me succeed and fulfilled and have a good quality of life versus what society needs in order to be a flourishing society?
At least in America, I think that is the struggle of quality of life. Some people want to have careers, which means they want to be able to say, I'm Chris Maute, the lab manager, right?
Right.
Other people are willing to be like, for 8 hours a day, I will do what I need to and wear the same uniform as everybody around me, because as soon as I leave work, I get to do what I want to do, right? And I have the money to do it. So I'm willing to sacrifice 8 hours a day because the 4 hours a day at the end of the night that are mine, I get to express my individuality or hang with the people I want to hang with, or, do nothing. And by do nothing, I mean, that's what I'm doing. I'm purposely doing nothing because that's what I'm choosing to do. You know what I mean? That's how I'm expressing my individuality. I think
I
that
don't
is the
know.
work-life balance.
Right. I don't know. I see like a lot of people that just sort of what you're sort of talking about is they had a word for these types of personalities in work, ones that sort of people that would try and do more and people that did the bare minimum and then sort of clocked
Oh, yeah,
off kind of
paycheck
thing.
players is what I call the people who are just doing the
Okay.
basics.
Well, see, I don't see that as sort of, I think that people will be like that if they haven't found something that they really love doing, that they haven't found the right thing for them. I might be wrong in that, but I don't like the word lazy. I dislike that word. I think that people just have other issues that cause them not to work to their full potential.
Mhm.
I think that people like that clock off, they just haven't found something that motivates them in the way that it would motivate somebody else, perhaps. So
And some people are just easy to please. Some people just love, I mean, they might be working at a job that you and I might be like, really? That's your gig? And they're like, yeah, man, people I work with is great. I make enough money to do what I want to do, and I'm happier than a pig in shit. Like, there are some people that are super self-satisfied and easily satisfied. So, like, we have to keep that in
well,
mind.
I respect it. I absolutely respect it. And here's one criticism that I have on Americans, in the ones that I've met anyway. When I was in Amsterdam, I met these Americans, and what struck me is their lack of thanking their service staff. Right? Serve would bring something, take their order. They would, these couple barked out their order. They came back, yes, grabbed it. Not a thank you anywhere, and it was astounding. It was astounding that they didn't thank the person for doing their job.
Even in America, that's rude, by the way. That is not an American
Oh,
trait.
is it? Oh, okay,
Oh,
gotcha.
yeah, like,
All
at
right.
least I worked in food service, so I like,
Yeah.
bend over backwards. I'm like, "Oh, thank you so much. That looks delicious. This smells I crack jokes with the wait. I tried to, like, make their life
Yeah.
as easy as possible.
Yeah. Okay. As long as that was just arsehole tourists, that I'm fine with that. Then that's
Americans,
fine.
as tourists, Americans have that reputation.
Yes,
They
yeah,
do.
it actually blew me away. And meeting these people, because you chat to people from other countries, and we're like, oh, you're American, that's great. And they sort of said, where are you from? And I'm like, Australia. And they said, oh, so your ancestors were convicts. And it's like, I mean, yes, that's true, but it's not the first thing you say in a conversation.
It
Just
might
just
be true that
saying.
you have a mole, but that's not the thing that you want pointed out, right?
Right. So it was quite funny. But I want to tie sort of secular humanism back into
Okay.
here. So if we can apply, if you care about well-being, if you care about
Mhm.
your own well-being and the well-being of society,
Or if you understand that
we
your well-being is determined by the well-being of society. Like, that's
well, I think it is a balancing act. I think it really is a balancing act, that you have fundamental needs that you maybe shouldn't give up under any circumstances.
Mhm.
Like a society that is run well and like if that it requires you to give up your autonomy, I think that that's a fundamental need that will never be met. So I think that sort of in that case, you can't give up one of your fundamental needs in order for society to be well. I think you have to hold on to that.
Well, I think that the organized religions got it right. In order to meet your fundamental needs, it's easier to do with a community, right? So community
I would agree.
building,
Yeah.
right? And if you don't have to take it to the Roman Catholic extent where you want to have as many kids as possible and like just create the community and enlarge the community as much as you can by just procreating like crazy. But there is something to say about like doing it all yourself is a fool's game, right? It will
Yes.
it'll get you so far, but just think of how much more you could do with the help of others. And what does that require? Well, reciprocity, altruism. Where do they
Empathy.
come from? Is it the social contract? Am I doing it just because I have to, or am I doing it because I like to do it? Am I incentivized to do it? For what reason? And that's where like moral development theory kind of comes in. Like am I avoiding punishment? Am I seeking rewards, or am I doing it for the intrinsic good? Because I've transcended, right? To talk about the transcension and the self-actualization. I'm doing it because it reaches goals that I have about my understanding about what a better society is. And part of that understanding is taking care of the people around me. Now, some people have very clear boundaries. That means my immediate family,
Yeah.
right? And other
Yeah.
people are like, everybody's my immediate family.
Yes. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but I've found that even the people that do say that everyone's my immediate family, they still do have a priority-based system on
Yeah,
those
you
that
can't
they
not.
know and are closer to. I think that's intrinsically a human thing, that we do prioritize those of us who are
Some
biologically
people would
closer
say
to
that
us.
that's a genetic thing, right? So like there's a mathematical equation, right? So like I don't have any children myself. I'm not a gamete donor. My kids are my stepchildren. They're my children, but for the purpose of this conversation, I did not contribute to their gametes. But I feel covered because my sister has a kid and my brother has 4 kids. So the genetic pool of the Maudis is going to be spread, even though I've been taking myself out of it, right? And then I have enough cousins that my whole mother's side is going to completely taken care of. I only need 8 cousins to take care of, my mother's family line, and 8 on my father's family line. And I have way more cousins than that. My mom's the second oldest of 9. My father's one of 5. So I have all of the immediate. I only need 4, right? Grand or nephews and nieces, and 8 cousins to cover my genetic pools on both sides. So there is some would say a genetic, if you want to believe that, justification for wanting to keep, boundaries close to families. But there's also a psychological approach, because if your immediate environment is surrounded by kin, then your genetic diversity is decreased.
Yes,
And
correct. Yeah.
here's where the psychology of olfaction comes in. There is something called the histocompatibility complex, which is the idea that you can detect through smell who is or let me rephrase that. Oh, I'll just keep going with how I said. You can detect through smell who would contribute to the most biodiversity by reproducing with them by the way that they smell. And they did these examples by taking genetic codes, or having genetic testing of a whole population of women and then of men. And then they had the men wear a t-shirt for a week, and then they saved them, and the women smelt them and made ratings of which ones they liked the smell of and which ones they were attracted to. And genetically speaking, it was always this sweet spot of like, your 8th to 10th cousin, like that kind of genetic distance. But it's called the histocompatibility complex. So maybe there's something to be said for having a community, a diverse community, because not only now that meets the reproduction need, because again, that's the fuzzy one. Food is easy, sleep is easy, sex. All right. Now we're talking about a structure. We're talking about rules, because in some hunter-gatherer rules, When women get pregnant, they have sex with each one of the men because they believe that all of the sperm combined to contribute to the child, right? So, like, that's a rule that we don't have. We have rules that they don't have. So, as soon as you start talking about reproduction, which is the miracle of life, you got rituals and rules. And that is just ripe for religion. But if we don't go the religious route, we can just take, all right, so what is the environment that promotes this? We can take a
Well, I mean, that would work in a very close-knit
pragmatic
community
approach. Go ahead.
as you know, the males, if they don't understand completely how reproduction works, none of them would know which one's the father. So that might work for a very, very tribalistic society. But in a certain sense, some of these ritualistic things that are still happening, we kind of have to update for that. They don't work in modern society. And
Yes.
you know, and even evolutionary byproducts like fear responses and things like that, they don't work in modern context. They're incredibly detrimental. Sort of a lot of aggression is caused by fear. So
Or the perception of fear.
perception of fear, absolutely, yeah, no, good point. But to get it back onto debate and how we talk about this, I really want to talk about that, and I do realize it's been over an hour and a half, so I usually aim for an hour and a half for these interviews, but we can go a bit longer if
Let's
you're
keep
okay
going
with
a
that.
little bit. Yeah, I'm into this. I can do
Yeah.
this.
So one thing I've noticed, and I really wanted you to comment on this, is that a few theists, and it sort of tugged at my brain, that they sort of say that secular humanism doesn't have the story that religions have.
That's
And
true.
what I think is that we may not have the emotional connection to appeal to some people. Can you talk about emotion versus rationality, or sort of, hard logic as appealing forces for different people?
So I do want to talk about it. And the first thing that I want to do is um, frame this a little bit differently. I feel that emotion is necessary for reason. And it might be a different approach than you're used to. But if you read, there's an author by the name of Antonio Damasio, and he wrote a book called Descartes' Error. Now, of course, Descartes is known for his phrase, cogito ergo sum, translated loosely as I think, therefore I am. Now, Damasio is kind of having play with that, and he's saying actually thinking isn't the end all be all, because theoretically, we could think forever and never come to a conclusion. So the thinking part is what gets it started, but you need to land the plane. And the only thing that lands the plane is a preference. Preference is based on goals and values, right? But it is a preference. And what is a preference? A preference is an affective state because it is something that you're determining is good or bad, appetitive or aversive. So, according to this theory by Antonio Damasio, having preferences, having affect is necessary for reason because, and he does studies. He's a neurologist, by the way. This isn't just a philosophical thing. He has people that come in as patients that have trauma, or they are born with certain parts of their brain lacking, or they have accidents. I guess that's the trauma part. And the parts of the brain that are responsible for emotions, when they are unfortunately removed or damaged, these people, when they are tested, are unable to make reasonable choices. So, for instance, when they're put into gambling circumstances, they just don't have a preference whether they win or lose. So, with the best hand, they'll fold, and with the shittiest hand, they'll keep anteing up. Their ability to make reasonable choices is demolished because their ability to feel emotions is absent or damaged. Okay, so let's take that and kind of put it aside. That said, there are some people, that's not a word. There are some people who prefer a more, let's say, a cognitive approach as compared
Yes.
to an intuitive approach. So, just to put clarity to that, I'm going to put it in kind of insulting terms, but not because they should be insulting, but hopefully it'll kind of make a point and make you remember the model that I'm making. A lot of beliefs and a lot of things that we accept to be true rise to the level of intuition, But with critical thinking and skill and mindfulness, you can have it rise to the level of cognition instead of intuition. And it might
Right.
still be, you might have thought it was true intuitively, but if you can justify why you have that belief or why you're skeptical of it, both of them need justifications, then you're living the examined life, right? And the unexamined life is not worth living. So I do put the intuitive way of thinking lower than cognition. That's just a way of thinking about it. There are people who disagree with that approach that are scientists that think that instincts and intuition are better guides at making good decisions. So that is kind of open, but that's a very specific field of decision making. I think that
Right.
for the purposes of this conversation, we can kind of separate intuitive thinkers from cognitive thinkers, with the idea that cognitive thinkers are, so in psychology, there's this dichotomy of the way that we think. It's called system one thinking versus system two thinking. System one thinking is reflexive and intuitive, and it happens quickly. And in order for it to happen, we have to rely on mental shortcuts known as heuristics, and we kind of fall prey to these things called cognitive biases. And then system two
Can you
thinking.
just quickly explain heuristics?
Yeah, heuristic is like a mental shortcut that requires you to jump over actual logic. So a mental shortcut would be like when I know that 2 + 2 = 4, I'm not adding 2 + 2 every
Yes.
time I say that, right? I have a mental shortcut that is when I see this, it means this. When I see red, I stop. When I see green, I go. Even if those
Right.
words aren't written on it, I have a heuristic. And if they were changed, it would take more time for me to process that as a task because I have to do more mental activity, right? Again, a heuristic is a mental shortcut, so that reduces the mental activity required to make a decision.
Yes.
Fair?
Yep.
So if we go with system two thinking, that's more of an algorithm way of thinking where you have a recipe that you follow. It's more deliberate. You take a step back before you make an intuitive decision. And a way to test this is to ask simple questions. So I'll ask this of you and I'll ask it to the people in the chat. Some of you may have heard this before, but here's a demonstration of system one versus system two thinking. So there's a shop and it's selling a baseball and a baseball bat. Together, they cost $1.10. The baseball bat costs $1 more than the baseball. Together, they cost $1.10. How much does the baseball cost? Give me your fastest response.
$1 more.
Mhm.
Sorry, could you repeat that? I'm not sure.
Absolutely. So a baseball and a baseball bat cost $1.10 altogether. The baseball bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost?
90 cents. No, so
How much?
20. $1 more.
It's
Well, I mean,
$1.10
my
altogether.
$1.10 altogether, and the baseball costs
The bat is $1 more. How much does the baseball cost?
$1 more. Well, I want to say.
Tell me what you want to say. You don't have to be right. I get this wrong.
Well, I mean, 10 cents is the incorrect
So
answer.
that's system one thinking, and it's wrong.
Yeah.
So yes. So let's take a step back. When somebody asks you, hey, this and this together cost $1.10, this cost $1 more, immediately you just subtract $1 from $1.10 and say 10 cents.
Right.
The actual
But
answer
that's-
is 5 cents.
Yes.
Because $1 more than 5 cents is $1.05. 5 cents and $1.05 is $1.10.
Yep.
Right? That is the deliberate system two thinking. But again,
Mhm.
unless you were already primed that I was going to fool you before I said it. If that was just a casual conversation and we just had to answer it, I would have said 10 cents and I already know what the answer is. Right? It's just the system one thinking is so
ingrained. Yeah.
It's so seductive. It's so
Mhm.
seductive. It's so hardwired, and we have these
Yeah.
biases.
Yeah.
All right. So now we're going to use that, right? That was a long walk towards system one is intuitive, system two is cognitive. That is a better way of breaking this down for me because reason versus emotion doesn't exist in my world.
But system one is fast. It allows us to make decisions really quickly.
Yes. And if you are an expert in a certain field, you are going to make very fast decisions accurately, better than people who aren't experts. And I can give you a
Right.
quick example of that for people who are chess masters. If you were to set up a board mid-play, they could look at it for just a second and then replicate exactly where the pieces are, because they have a structure within which that makes sense, and they are experts, right?
Yep.
If we were to try to do it, we would perform horribly. Now,
Right.
if you placed those pieces randomly on the board, chess experts would do as bad as non-chess experts, because it doesn't
Yep.
make sense to them. There's no structure within which their expertise can take advantage of their mental shortcuts or heuristics. See what I mean?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
expertise allows you to make better system one decisions, but not always accurate, because we fall prey to biases like priming. Like the example I gave was a priming example. I primed you. This is $1.10
Yeah.
together. I'm taking one away. It's $1. Okay, subtract $1 from $1.10. Nope.
And I think probably sort of magic works that way. You prime people to think that it's going to be, sort of one thing.
Magicians are experts at cognitive biases and misleading and deception.
Yeah.
And the kind of misleading and deception that are easy to expose because of your understanding of heuristics and cognitive biases.
So something I've always admired. So I think that in debate, if you want to convince the people that automatically go for the type 1 thinking, that you do need something to appeal to their instinctive heuristic, something that feels right rather than is logically right.
So
something
that's the rhetoric part of debate.
Right. And
so that's
so
Neil
deGrasse
Tyson, things that rhyme that are also kind of true. If you can make snappy retorts that are partially true, that you can unpack in the process of debate, zingers, if you will, right? Like if you want it to be super crass, you could say, hey, science flies us to the moon and religious flies us into buildings, right? Like that was super popular after 9/11.
Right.
Like that's a horrible thing to say, but if you're in a debate with somebody who is arguing the counter, you can just whip that one out, and it has all the emotional impact that you need to take the person off guard and have them fluster while you have all your talking points, right? But that's rhetoric, that's strategy, not content. Nobody debates content anymore.
I try.
In my opinion, in my humble opinion.
I try. Well, that's what I love about Neil deGrasse Tyson.
I appreciate
he really does
that. But hold on a second, Mark. How many of your interlocutors are good faith interlocutors?
Some of them, depressingly few.
That's my point. They're not content driven. Even though you take it seriously and value it, you can't even find a consistent set of interlocutors that are doing it in good faith for the purpose of content.
But is that good for me, or is that bad for me? I mean,
if you're boxing, you don't want to spend all your time learning technique. You got to get in there and spar, right? So like these rhetorical moves, if you want to continue to be good at debate, I think that you're fantastic at it. I've never seen anyone handle Kent Hovind so dismissively. Like that takes a set of goddamn brass balls. Like keeping in mind, when I interviewed Kent Hovind, I called him Dr. Hovind, right? Because my approach is completely different than yours, and it wasn't a debate. Okay. But like the way that you just handled him, you were just like, that's absurd. Like your incredulity at the things that he was saying was just exactly what was needed at that moment. Like you didn't need to go into the details. It was just like, no, that's not how it works. Just simple phrases like that, where you just kind of like dismissed some of the, like those moves you need to learn. That's good. That's process, right? So to me, there's content and there's process. The way you deliver the content. Process is way more important in debates than content. Being a good showman, having a good voice, being tall, being good looking, all these things, unfortunately, are psychological trappings that make people's decisions different.
Yeah, that kind of sucks. I'd rather people take it from an argument, but
well, it just so happens you're a dashingly handsome man with an awesome voice.
Oh, thank you, Maute. You too. I'm jealous of your wife, quite frankly, but never mind. Lucky woman, Shannon. Okay, well, with that flattery, which
He's
Thank you
jealous
so
of
much.
me 'cause I'm so goddamn good looking.
Is that what he
Yeah,
said?
That's
damn right.
exactly what he said. He said he's going to make out with me if he ever comes to America.
He was jealous.
Damn right.
He's jealous
You'll have
of
to
you
wait
because
and
of how
find
good
out.
looking. He wants to be in your position.
So basically, he's jealous of me because I get to make out with you.
Yes,
Is that what he's saying?
that's pretty much what I think Mark Reid is saying right now.
Yeah, absolutely. That'll be on the internet forever. I'm just realizing.
She says I don't put my clothes in the hamper. Is that a deal breaker?
That's not a deal breaker.
Ah,
To clean his beard trimming.
Look, I'm not getting involved in this. This sounds a little too personal. I'm not.
I
getting
do
involved
clean my
in this
beard
at all.
trimmings out of the
You
sink.
wanna go look at it now? Oh my God,
This-
what's up, please?
This
I love
is
you so much.
You're the best snuggler in the world.
I love you so much. That's so funny. All right, I need to recover. Give me 1 second.
yeah. No worries. I'll tee up the questions because I do have a few, and I would
All right,
like
that
to
was
thank
good.
who
I'm
sent
so
them, but
glad you were listening.
I-
This is what you need. This is what secular humanism promotes. Finding people that you can be teammates with.
yeah.
That's the goal, man. Right there. That's the dinner table. That's what I used to strive to. I still strive towards, but far less.
Mm.
Especially now that I'm going to be this new position, this multimedia manager. Like, I kind of want to keep my presence chill. This is a wonderful discussion, a great outlet for me to be online again.
Oh, it's been absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much, Matt. Like Chris, I really.
I think we
enjoyed
could
this
talk
discussion.
forever, Mark. Like, we could
Probably.
chalk up a weekly version of this and it'd be 2 hours and we would not run out of content.
Probably. Well, speaking for myself and being neurodivergent, I don't. I have a tendency not to have community as much as I probably need, and so there is an intercept between me wanting community and how I actually go about doing that. So, not being able to sort of recognize social cues so much, and I've gotten a lot better at it. But the problem with autistic people is a lot of energy is devoted towards analysis, and we just get tired. Like when I'm tired, I can't make sense of what people are doing, and that's not to do with anybody else. It's to do with me. But
Yeah, but I think that the way that you handle it is wonderful because like your vulnerability is your strength. You make it clear. You explicitly say that you're neurodivergent. There have been times when I've posted thing in my Discord and you just flat out said like, I'm having a tough time with my autism today. Are you
Yeah.
being serious or not? Like that honesty and candor is just so appreciated. And I'm sure that like I apologized and I made clear, okay, here's what
oh,
I
you don't
meant,
need
this is
to.
what I said.
That's the thing.
Yeah, but
yeah,
I mean,
no.
I want
when
to.
I get
Right. I want to make
Well-
sure that your confusion doesn't lead to frustration. And then if
No,
I can
no,
clarify
and-
with a
and-
couple words, I will.
Yeah, and when I'm focused and I know like, oh, Maute's joking. Of course he's joking. He's just having a rib. Of course. It's when I get tired and I don't know, and I can be emotional just like anybody else. And
Oh yeah.
but that's got nothing to do with you. I realize that is something that I have, and that's just the way my brain works. I don't pick up on social cues a lot.
What benefit do you think social media has had on this? Your ability to talk to me, right? From your home, not having to go out. You have a community online. You have people that are watching you. You have
absolutely. Absolutely, and I love the community of the atheist community, the secular humanist community, the sort of debate community, even even people that vehemently disagree with me. I absolutely love it, and I think that without it, I really wouldn't get that sense of community that I need. So I really appreciate everybody being part of this ragtag bunch of misfits who do think differently. I
Yes.
absolutely love it.
So take a step back. Like you have
Yeah.
things to look forward to. Your dopamine system is being triggered. Having things to look forward to that you can make a reality and then have something to show for it afterwards. And you did it with people like that. If that isn't community building, I don't know what is, right? If that's not getting your
absolutely.
social fix. So my question to you is like, I mean, you're old enough to know the difference pre and post internet. Do you think that internet, social media, the ability to have these kind of hangs has been a game changer for people who might need more social interaction and might not go outside of their rooms to pursue it?
I think that it's a double-edged sword. Not to be pedantic or anything, but I think in one sense it's fantastic. In another sense, it may be too much for a lot of people who are neurodivergent to handle. There's a lot of platforms that I don't go on because it's too much for me, trying to work through what everybody means by what they're saying with no
Layers of
verbal
sarcasm.
right, with no verbal or physical sort of no
Cues.
cues, right, is a lot of work for me. So I feel a lot better when I can see people and I can work through those verbal cues and I can kind of interpret them. So I think that in a way it's fantastic. In a way it's kind of too much. It's just too much, like all of the social media platforms trying to work through what people mean by what they say.
I'm
It's
not
difficult.
neurodivergent. It's too much for me. Like, I'm
Yeah,
not on
gotcha. Yeah, no,
Facebook,
totally.
barely do X or Twitter, whatever the fuck you want to call it anymore. I don't even do my
Yeah.
YouTube hangs the way I used to.
Well,
But I mean,
hit me up if ever you are. I feel like I
oh, I
want to be
love
there.
this. Yeah, let's do like a regular, like, monthly thing where we
Oh,
just talk
sure.
about
Yeah,
whatever.
I'm more than happy to.
Yeah.
So just some quick questions. I want to get through them. So,
Yeah.
Titan Uranus. Question from
Nightmare,
Audi.
baby.
What does any of this have to do with post-meal citrus-based sweet treats?
Listen, Titan, I've had enough of your fucking bullshit. He's referencing the fact that I hate lemon bars. Now, the fact that he has extended the citrus motif to every other food group doesn't make sense. I would eat, I don't know, chicken l'orange, citrus fruit. Lemon water ice, for those of you that aren't familiar, on the East Coast, there is a shaved ice dessert that is just called Italian ice. It's just slightly different. Is delicious. Lemonade, fantastic. Lemon bars, go fuck yourself. I just think they're disgusting. That custard, lemon curdy, sour. It's just like a goddamn lemon came in my mouth. I don't like it.
Okay. No, that's fair. That's certainly just preferential.
Yeah.
Bond Servant has I am in a relationship with a single mum of 4. Do you think I am wrong for that? Well, if you mean a single mum of 4, like they have 4 children, then no, that's perfectly fine. If you mean like they're age 4, then yes, there's something definitely wrong with
Oh,
that.
wow. Yeah. You are. That was a fucking twisted way of interpreting that sentence. And I love you for it.
I don't know. I honestly, for a second, I know, it probably means a single mum of 4 children now that I think about it. But
why would that be bad, though? I mean,
I don't know.
If we were the alpha dudes, like these, I fucking hate this, the whole fucking manosphere. Yeah, they would definitely say, like, why would you want to raise other people's children and blah, 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 blah. And
well, I think that sort of attitude is sort of, what do I get out of it? And I could appeal for that. Well, those children will love you as a father. As long as you love them, there's something
life changing. It is a life-changing event. Having people to be responsible for in that capacity is a life-changing event. Just in ways that I can't even describe.
Well, I won't have children, so I won't know what that's like. So
that was me. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I had my vasectomy when I was 30 years old. I planned on not having kids. I have bipolar 1 disorder. The last thing I want is to have a depressive episode in front of kids, or to pass on my propensity to have depression to, my children. Now, I have stepkids now. They have seen me depressed. The world hasn't ended, right? The sun set and the sun rose, and that is now a dynamic in the family. But I really don't think they love me any less because I have depression.
Carol Kinzer asks, what does Maute say about spiritual experiences? Are they just psychological?
Yeah. I mean, yes. For things that can't currently be explained by science, and I'm not a scientismist, I don't think that everything will be explained. For the things that can't be explained with future technology, I'm happy to accept them as mysterious.
Sure. I think I've read some stuff about the mystical experience. I think is how it's described as in a lot of papers that
Yeah.
it's categorized into sort of I think about four things: sort of a feeling of oneness with everything, a
That's
feeling
the
of
transcendence part.
transcendence. Yeah. So all of these different things.
Ego death.
Right. They found that sort of the same experience that they consider mystical, they can also get off like a particularly huge sort of mushroom high kind of
Or
thing. So
DMT trip, or psychedelics.
right. So the mystical experience. I mean, some theists will point to it and say, "Hey, look, they sort of acknowledging the supernatural. They're really not. They're just giving a categorization to these series of um, emotive states that seem to make up a commonality between people." So I
Yeah.
don't
So
seem.
it's like, for me, it's the critical thinker in me is like, well, we've actually not cracked the code, but we have at least
Mm,
determined that the way the brain works is like a algebraic equation, right? When these
yeah.
receptors get this experience happens. Now,
Mhm,
when these receptors get excited, well, now that depends. What's the this? Well, it could be
mm,
LSD. It could be being in a big tent revival church experience, right? Because being surrounded by lots of people who think the same as you, that are super high energy, that are chanting and
yeah.
baptized by fire, and like, everything that a not, what's the word I want to use, fundamentalist, what are they called, babe? Snake handlers.
Huh?
The
Pentecostals.
Pentecostals, thank you. Yeah, being in a Pentecostal tent revival, that might be the thing that triggers that
Right.
receptor that leads to that experience. What we've demonstrated is that all you need to do is trigger that receptor, and so many
Mm,
things can trigger it. One of them happens to be a religious experience, but that's not the only one. And the fact that we can control the experience reliably and predictably by triggering this receptor in a certain way, what is supernatural anymore about it? Right? So then it seems
um,
very natural, right? Because we have
yeah.
to accept that everything psychological is biological. Because again, we're not dualists, we are monists. So our current model is all experience can be reduced to something happening in the brain.
And there's a ton of questions to be asked about how that works and
Oh, and I'm
why it
happy to have
works.
a conversation about all of those questions.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Okay, so next question from Cerberus Hex. Secular humanism seems to be attempting to create an adaptive layer between cultures and a foundation for normative ethics. Do you think it's achieved that, or maybe I'm just wrong? Um,
I don't think it's achieved anything. I think that it is just trying to put something on the table, because it's easier to change something that's on the table than putting it on the table. So I just think they're trying to put it on the table as a way of being a benchmark for morality that is not religious. Right? And it's going to take a while for it to get refined. It's going to take a while for it to get popular. And then I think that once the consensus, if there is a consensus that thinks that it's the way that we should go, that is the thing that we value, it is the goal that we have, well, then it's going to crowdsource itself and change, and it might turn into its own religion. Like, that's the crazy thing about group dynamics in psychology, right? Like that South Park episode. I think it's South Park. Yeah, it's South Park, where they make fun of Richard Dawkins because they go into the future and religion is gone, but now there are two different sects of Richard Dawkins believers
mhm.
that essentially have a
A
fundamentalist
schism.
view of
Yeah,
what's that?
Richard Dawkins schism.
Yeah, and it's hilarious, the way
Yeah.
that they address it. But
So a lot of people give Dawkins sort of they criticize him recently for some of the things he said. It's important, even if you do criticize him, to understand how much he's contributed to our understanding of things like memes, ideas, how
oh, yeah,
evolution
he
works.
he coined the term memes
Oh, sure did.
in the Selfish Gene.
Mm. So I just for my money, Cerberus, I don't think it's trying to create an adaptive layer. I'm not sure, like an adaptive layer. I don't think so, and I don't think it's trying to create a foundation. I think that the foundation already exists that we're talking about with these ubiquitous fundamental needs of humans. I think that foundation already exists. Whether that is a
I just think they're
subjective,
trying to, through substitution, guide
yeah,
society towards their goals.
right, right, and it seems to be a goal that is very widespread even across cultures. Most people do want good quality of life. Nearly everybody wants good quality of life. We may disagree on how that comes
Yeah.
about, but that foundation already seems to be there. So I don't think they're trying to create a foundation. I think what we're doing is sort of promoting that science and understanding is the way that we're going to get to that result, the best way to get to that result. And I think that's the critical thing. I don't think it's achieved that, no, but I think it's achieved it on a small scale, like i.e. secular humanists seem to agree. So, you know, if that is success, sure.
I mean, there is a humanist manifesto, right? There
Right.
is secular humanism. There was the work that CFI did, as well as the founder of CFI, whose name eludes me. He was a philosopher who euphomia was the word that he was using. God damn it, why can't I think of it? Anywho. Yeah, so there are documents. It has been bandied about in philosophical and academic circles. It is like an entry in, you know, most philosophical books. Like there is a
What does
definition
CFI
for it.
stand for again? What does
What's
CFI
that?
stand for?
Center
What's a
for
CFI?
Inquiry. Center for Inquiry.
Paul Kurtz.
That's it. Oh man, whenever you want to have this interview, while I was a research fellow there, was when Kurtz was being removed and replaced
Okay.
against his will. And he would give talks where he would start spouting off about his situation in front of everybody in the audience. But yeah, I have some crazy stories about my 3 weeks in a Center for Inquiry.
Airing your dirty laundry out in
It
front
was
of
some
the
shit.
audience.
It was some
Wow.
shit.
Wow.
Anyway.
Robin Webster asks, this was about intuition versus the more cognitive thinking.
Sure.
She wants to know, is this from thinking fast and thinking slow?
So the intuitive versus cognitive thinking, yeah, that system 1 versus system 2 thinking is directly taken out of Daniel Kahneman's work and summarized in Thinking Fast and Slow. Now, Dan Kahneman, for those of you that don't know, Dan Kahneman's claim to fame is that he and his colleague, who has deceased since they've done this, his name is Amos Tversky, and I believe that they were at the University of Israel. They won, psychologists, they won the Nobel Prize in Economics, because up until the time that they had won it, economists had thought that humans were rational actors that would always be incentivized by the thing that would maximize their gains. Kahneman and Tversky came along and said, no, actually, humans are prone to biases that interfere with our ability to be irrational. In fact, I can prove it and demonstrate it so consistently that I believe that humans are predictably irrational. And I pointed it out with that baseball and baseball bat example. I can predict that you were going to say 10 cents. That is irrational. You are predictably, not you personally, but us, we are all predictably irrational. So that's who Daniel Kahneman is. Now, Daniel Kahneman, having won the Nobel Prize in economics for his psychological analysis of decision making, wrote an article with somebody who thought that intuitive thinking was better than this approach that Kahneman was promoting. And they wrote an article together where they both reviewed the literature together and came to conclusions. So if you want an academic paper that balances intuitive thinking, and not just like the folk psychology of intuitive thinking, no, the literature body on intuitive thinking versus the literature body on, cognitive biases and system 2 thinking, go ahead and look for that article by Daniel Kahneman. I just can't remember the other author's name, but there is an academic field of intuitive thinking as well. Yeah, Dan Kahneman.
Wouldn't
He's the shit.
wouldn't something like CBT be that overriding of your intuitive thinking to make a more rational and cognitive analysis of your that's for the audience, it's cognitive behavioral therapy. Essentially, you question your instinctive thoughts or your thoughts basically and analyze them to see whether they are in fact correct or you're mistaken.
Yes, I'm a huge fan of cognitive behavioral therapy.
Same.
Real quick history lesson, if you don't mind, just because you're talking to a psychologist and I teach this shit.
Sure.
So cognitive therapy or behavioral therapy started in the behaviorist movement. Remember, at the very beginning of this hang, like I said, there's all this awesome foreshadowing in this 1 2-hour hang. The behaviorist movement, there was benefits of that, right? So again, behaviorists were showing through animal learning how simple learning occurred. Simple learning is associative learning. If this stimulus provides a reflexive response, if that stimulus is paired with this other thing that doesn't promote a response, that other weird thing will mysteriously cause you to have that natural response over and over again. Okay, that's classical conditioning. And then there's training your animal to do something. Okay, you want it to roll over. Well, if you get it to sit down, well, that's halfway there. So you start reinforcing the existing behavior. And then as its behavior moves towards what you want, you shape it through further reinforcement. All of this
that's
is
like a Pavlovian response, isn't it?
Well, the Pavlovian was the classical conditioning, right? Because the food was the natural stimulus causing the natural response of salivating. And then the metronome or the tone was the unconditioned stimulus because, or the conditioned stimulus, I should say, because they had to learn a substitute. When you talk about classical conditioning, substitute the word learned for conditioned. So the unconditioned stimulus is the unlearned stimulus, meat. The unconditioned response is the unlearned response, salivating. The conditioned stimulus is the learned stimulus, a pitch. And then once that salivating becomes associated with the conditioned stimulus, its name changes from the unconditioned response to the conditioned response. That's Pavlovian classical conditioning. And that's different from operant conditioning, B.F. Skinner, animal training, shaping, because it starts with a stimulus, right? The food causes salivation. So now I'm going to fuck with the stimulus so that that response is caused by something else. Whereas operant conditioning starts with the behavior. The closer you get to what I want, the more I'll reinforce that behavior, but the behavior comes first.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I'm talking about cognitive behavioral therapy. That simple learning model applies to humans, but we're way more complex than that. Not only do we engage in simple learning, we also engage in complex learning. So this behavioristic model was popular for things like systematic desensitization. Hey, if you have a phobia of spiders, what better way to get over it than to systematically change your behavior so that good, relaxing feelings get reinforced and anxiety producing stimuli become reduced or extinguished, because extinction is a model in conditioning. When you stop providing the good stimulus with the secondary stimulus, you will extinguish the behavior, right? The sound will no longer produce salivation if you stop pairing it with the food for long enough. So that model, that ability to extinguish a behavior, is now used for phobias. Okay, you don't like spiders. Let's sit you in a room, and on the complete opposite side of the wall, I'm going to have a picture of a spider, and we're going to do relaxation exercises. Okay, let's do that for a week. After a week, I'm going to bring that picture closer to you. And then after a week, I'm going to have you hold the picture, and we're going to do relaxation exercises the whole time. And then eventually, I'm going to get a plastic spider, and I'm going to hold it, and you're going to see me hold it. And then you're going to hold the plastic spider. And then eventually it's going to be a real spider that they're able to hold and not be anxious about. That is behaviorist therapy. That is systematic desensitization. And then a guy named Aaron T. Beck came along with cognitive therapy, which was just looking at the biases we have in order to change what's going on. It was different than Freudian therapy because it didn't require insight or an analysis of your family history. It was very pragmatic. Cognitive therapy is, what are the obstacles to your life? How do we change them? Okay, you think in black and white terms. Be cognizant, cognitive, that you have this habit. And when opportunities arise, when you are prone to use black and white thinking, recognize that you do it and use these techniques to engage in other styles that aren't as much of a bias, system 2 thinking. So the cognitive, the predictable, oh, come on, Chris, the predictable irrationality that Kahneman talked about in his Nobel-winning work is the same kind of cognitive tricks that cognitive therapists use. Now, eventually, they had a love child, right? The behaviorists and the cognitivists, and that is cognitive behavioral therapy. Why? Because behaviors are so important to how we shape consciousness and perception that it needs to be included in a triangle of items, variables. One is behavior, one is emotions, and one is thoughts or cognitions. You can't change one without affecting the others. So if you want to change one, you triangulate it. If you want to change your emotions, change the behaviors and the thoughts around that event. If you want to change the thoughts, change your behaviors and the way that you think about it, etc., etc., etc. So cognitive behavior therapy is a mindfulness moment where you stop reflexively thinking, take a system 2 approach, and with a therapist, recognize what cognitive biases and shortcuts are contributing to your less than quality of life, right? Because you wouldn't be going to therapy unless there was a quality of life issue. And then with practice in recognizing them and overcoming them, then the problem, you don't need to do a family history to figure out that, okay, for the rest of my life, I need to realize that I have a propensity to think in black and white terms. And that gets me in trouble because there's definitely shades of gray. Okay, here's these techniques that I have for making sure that I'm within the shades of gray boundaries. So yes, this all of that is connected.
Mhm.
So cognitive behavior therapy is one of the few therapies that is very evidence and research based. And like I said, I like the third wave cognitive behavior therapy. What makes it third wave means it includes Buddhist concepts like mindfulness and meditation. Because since that is like the first step of pumping the brakes, it is a version of CBT that focuses on that mindful moment and practicing.
So learning how to stop before you react and then start that process is
breathing exercises.
And just as a side note, if anyone, I've done CBT in my lifetime, if anyone hasn't done it, it is a lot harder to change that way you think based on your emotion than people sort of make out. They say, "Oh, we'll just change the way." It's incredibly difficult. So
easier said than done.
Oh, absolutely. Last question from Cerberus Hex. Being that roughly half the population is below 100 IQ, maybe we need a set of ethics that are intuitive for it to be successful over something logical like secular humanism. What do you think about that?
All right. So I'm going to clear up a couple of things, and this will be the last point, right?
Yeah, this is the last question.
Okay. So Cerberus, you should know better. The average of 100 IQ is an American standard. IQ actually doesn't use the normal distribution of 100 as a score. With this, let me rephrase that. It doesn't use the quotient part of mental age divided by chronological age. It uses a normalized distribution that actually uses z-scores. And so like that normal distribution model, that was how it was done, but it's different now. Now, the reason why it has changed is because there's recognition of what is known as the Flynn effect, where the average of 100 needs to be calibrated. Daryl, I know that you said this, but I figured I'd say it in the actual hang. And good job, Daryl, for catching this. And Cerberus, you know that I'm busting your balls. I have no issue with you. I'm just kind of being dramatic for the sake of making this entertaining. And IQ, intelligence quotient, is what you get from an intelligence test. Intelligence tests were developed in first world European derivative nations, and um, intelligence tests are a low resolution measurement of mental ability. Mental ability spans a whole bunch of things, but intelligence tests are based on what a specific culture values. And the reason why I take that position is because if you read books by people like Jared Diamond, Guns, Germs, and Steel, he gives wonderful examples about hunter-gatherer tribes in New Guinea who, like, think about it, who would be the prototypical smart person in the United States or in Europe, right? If you go with like Einstein, cool, let's drop Einstein in the middle of this hunter-gatherer society in New Guinea. Is he going to be the most intelligent person there? No, he doesn't know how to fucking read the moss on the trees to determine where's north, right? He doesn't have these instincts or expertise to make snap decisions that are going to increase the survival of the people in his community. At the same time, the most intelligent person in that culture, if dropped in the middle of New York, would make, a wonderful 80s movie, a comedy, probably with Eddie Murphy, something like, Coming to America, except, more racist. So anyway, like, yeah, so if the question that you're asking is, and I'm going to pull another George Carlin line, think of the most average intelligence person you know and recognize that half the world is less smart than them, right? Because yeah, whether we're talking about intelligence tests or mental activity, there's going to be a range of mental activities. And because there's a range of mental activities, there are some people who are not going to be as adept at picking up on complex, abstract structures. Like, why should I listen to you? It's for the greater good, but I'm trying not to be paternal. Like, everyone else understands that our teamwork helps each other and it's going to help you. You don't get that. How do I make you get that? Maybe you can't get that. I think that's what Cerebus is kind of trying to tap into, right? Because if it's intuitive, you don't have to have that cognitive, abstract understanding. And if you're still listening,
I think
correct.
that I think that IQ is very poorly understood. It's very poorly quantified. It's sort of very poor. I think Titan was sort of alluding to it briefly, that it's sort of it more tests your ability to do IQ tests than sort of an IQ. That also that I don't think that finding a more intuitive system is necessarily a good thing, because then you're sort of saying, hey, maybe intuition would be better for morality. I don't think so. I think maybe, like, stop doing a Florida and stop people from critically thinking is probably a better solution to that. Really make critical thinking and the ability to think cognitively more widespread is probably the alternative solution.
And within Florida, there will be cohorts of people who rebel against the non-critical thinking, right? Even people from other states in America will probably go to Florida to have conferences and conventions and, speaking engagements, talking specifically about that. Nonprofit organizations like Center for Inquiry will probably, sponsor shit like that.
And Robin, with the last super chat, Robin Webster for $5, great guest. Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big fan of Christopher Maute. He's amazing.
Thank you so much, Robin.
No, it was an amazing conversation. I really enjoyed it, Chris. I'm so sorry we've gone like an hour over, which is just incredible, but I understand why. That was incredible. I'm going to rewatch this, and I've made notes, and it's just look, the amount of stuff I learned when I talked to you was incredible. But I want to thank you so much, and I'll put my banner up. I'm sorry for keeping you so long, but I want to thank everybody for joining me. Thank you for your time, and Maute's got his channel, so head over there if you do like guitar and psychology and cognitive biases and olfactory instincts. What am I trying to say? That triggers kind of things that trigger us.
Olfactory sensations and perception.
Yeah,
right? And we didn't get into like the whole sensation bit, right? Like we didn't get as deep into it as some of the questions that you had sent me. So we can go deeper into that. So many different.
I forgot about
avenues.
the questions. Hold on, I did have them here. I forgot about them completely. What an amazing professional host does questions, sends them to you, and then just ignores
Oh yeah,
them
like
for the entire
as if the
interview.
conversation lagged at all. You just point me in a direction, dude.
Yeah. No, I think I covered a couple of them. I definitely covered a couple of them. Yeah, absolutely.
So our sense is
Yeah, that.
subjective. I mean, the answer would
Yeah,
have to be this: the perception is subjective. The sensation might be objective, right? In the sense that
right.
depending on the receptor, we can measure whether or not it was activated. And depending on what part of the brain, we can determine whether or not that activated receptor causes a sensation in the brain, right?
Mm,
So that means that it is being that is being perceived, or let me rephrase that. It's being sensed, but maybe there's something wrong with that area of the brain that's preventing it from
yeah.
actually being perceived. So, the people who don't have the receptors for pain, they have to live a very careful life because they can't tell when they've
Mm,
stepped on a nail, or
yep.
or at least from the pain. Of course, the piece of wood that's stuck to their foot, maybe they'll notice that, but
That might be a clue. Sure.
just the little one. But anyway, don't get me
Well,
started. We have to restart another whole conversation to address
yeah,
this.
yeah, absolutely. No, I'll hit you up. So if you did like Maute, leave a like, subscribe if you're not subscribed for more of things like Maute and things like me. I love these conversations. Thank you so much for joining me, and don't forget, as always, to be kind to yourself. Be very gentle and kind with yourself. Be kind to each other, and much love. And I'll all see you next time. Peace.